Good morning, everybody. I want to call this meeting to order. We do have a quorum. Nice to see everybody in person. And I am going to appoint Shayla Shreves as the recorder for this meeting. Today is our July business meeting, and it is really fantastic to be in a room that I have heard we used regularly in the decade before COVID. I mean, just look at this space and I guess admire it. I mean, it's beautiful. I want to note that we will ask the architect of the Capitol, our hosts, to say a few words about the room at the beginning of the meeting. And I want to acknowledge that the meeting is being live cast on Facebook. So hi, everybody online. I'm sorry you can't be here in person. I want to also thank staff for all of the work that they did to get this meeting pulled together. This is a highly complicated effort, not just because we have 24 council members, but because there's a lot of logistics involved. So thank you to Reed, and thank you to our office directors and our staff for pulling this together. With that, I think I'm going to ask Shayla to take a roll call vote of the members and to state any proxies.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We do not have any proxies. We will go through our attendance roll call. Vice Chairman Jordan Tannenbaum.
Present.
Carmen Jordan Cox. Erica Avrami. Monica Rhodes. Sunny Ward.
Here.
Jane Woodfin. Amelia Marchand. Governor John Carney. Architect of the Capitol, Thomas Austin. Representing Agriculture, I think she is running late, okay. Representing Interior, Mike Martinez. Thought I saw Mike. Representing Defense, Ron Tickle. Representing Homeland Security, Trey Watkins. Representing HUD, Kristen Fontenot.
Present.
Representing Transportation, Christopher Coase. Representing VA, Michael Brennan.
Present.
And GSA, they have not arrived yet, okay. Representing CEQ, Anna Unruh-Cohen.
Here.
Representing the National Trust, Carol Quillen. And representing Nick Shippo, that would be Ramona Bartos. And representing NAFPO, Valerie Grusing. And Chair Sarah Bronin.
Present.
And our observers, Susan Barnes from the Foundation.
Present.
And Preserve America Youth Summit's Director, Ann Walker. And GSA, Beth Savage.
Present.
And did I miss anyone? No? That's our attendance, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much. With that, I will ask for a motion and a second to adopt the agenda found in the meeting book.
I move we adopt the agenda.
Second? Okay, thank you. All those voting in favor? This is a voice vote. Simply say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed or abstentions? Thank you. And I will ask for a motion and a second to adopt the minutes from the prior business meeting in March. Those are in everybody's meeting book materials. So motion, a second, and a voice vote.
Motion.
Okay, there was a second from Vice Chairman Tannenbaum, if you couldn't hear that. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? And I'll just note, Shayla, for your records that Mr. Martinez is here from the Department of the Interior. Thank you so much. And with that, we'll move to the first agenda item. We have 4 new representatives as of today, and we'll hear from each of them now. So first, I wanted to welcome Thomas Austin, the new architect of the Capitol and our host today, and invite him to introduce himself and maybe say a bit about this room.
Well, good morning. Thank you, Chair Bronin. My name is Tom Austin. I'm the newly appointed 13th architect of the Capitol, and I'm pleased to welcome you all here this morning. We're very happy to host you. It's impressive to be surrounded by such a group of preservation experts, especially in a room like this. The Kennedy Caucus Room, which is the name of this room, is one of the most historic rooms in our nation's capital. This room has served as a stage for some of the most dramatic Senate hearings in our history, to include the sinking of the Titanic, the Teapot Dome scandal, Pearl Harbor, Watergate, and many more. As I begin my appointment as the architect of the Capitol, I'm reminded every day that history surrounds us. I'm still quite starstruck every time I drive onto this campus and see the dome looming ahead of us. From the Capitol Dome to our heritage assets and historic landscape, my agency has a special responsibility to preserve these symbols of our American democracy, and I'm thankful that you share the same sense of duty through your own work as thought leaders and practitioners. Historic sites, buildings, and landmarks continue to contribute to the American story, and the work we do today and the decisions made in this room are important to advance America's preservation ethic. AOC values our relationship with the ACHP, and we're proud to serve alongside each of you and our federal partners. So thank you for being here, thank you for the work you do, and thank you, Chair Bronin, for giving me an opportunity to share a few words, and thank you, Executive Director Nelson. I especially want to thank the ACHP staff. I appreciate the work you do and your commitment to preservation and public service. I would like to stay this morning, but I do have other commitments. This is my 4th week in office, and we have a little over 18.5 million square feet, and I've got about 2,000 more people to meet. So I am definitely getting my steps in as I go around the campus. But it's really an honor to be here, and I really appreciate the work you do. I'm going to be turning this over to Dr. Emma Mora, who will be standing in for the rest of the meeting on behalf of the architect of the Capitol. So thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Tom. And again, thank you again for hosting us here today. We look forward to more interaction in the future. With that, I'm going to turn to 3 new members that were appointed by the president. And some of you have already met them on committee meetings, and I'd like to have them each introduce themselves. First, Dr. Erica Avrami, who has already started fulfilling her ACHP responsibilities by following in Sunny Ward's footsteps, not only as a committee chair, but also as a participant in a live and in-person roundtable on housing and historic preservation, which I think really benefited from your presence, just as our roundtable in Los Angeles benefited from Sunny's. With that, a few words would be great.
Thank you so much, Chair Bronin. It's an honor to be part of this esteemed group. I am an associate professor of historic preservation at Columbia University. I previously served at both World Monuments Fund and the Getty Conservation Institute. I focus on policy issues, particularly as they relate to questions of social inclusion and climate. And I am grateful to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll turn next to Jane Woodfin, who I had the pleasure of talking with last night and talking about this building that we are in right now. And she has a really keen eye to detail, pointing out, for example, that some parts of the ceiling were newly painted red in the rotunda and maybe even in this room. So as somebody who worked in this building for some time and somebody who appreciates the preservation details, we're very pleased to welcome you. And you'll have to turn on your mic with a little green button.
Thank you. I don't have that much to say other than thank you, Chair, for last night's conversations and all you're doing. And I'm very honored to be part of the ACHP. What you do, which I hope to be part of going forward, is just so important to our nation, our democracy, and we don't want to forget it. And so I appreciate everything you've done, your initiatives moving forward, and I hope to contribute some part to that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And finally, our new tribal member, Amelia Marchand, who has also already fully, just in the first few weeks, embraced her responsibilities, again, not only as a committee chair, but also as someone who has sat in and represented the ACHP with me on consultation meetings, particularly in the Native Hawaiian exemption. So she's already devoted hours to the ACHP, and I would like to invite her to say a few remarks as well.
Wai Lim, thank you very much. In Chai-Squee Skumkanalks, in Maswanik Skumkanalks, my name's Amelia Marchand, as Chair Bronin said. I'm a citizen of the Caucus Confederated Tribes located in north central Washington state, a confederacy of 12 different tribes, not because we wanted to become allies, but because of the process of assimilation. And through that heritage on my father's side, I'm Chief Joseph Band of Wallowa Nez Perce, Palouse, Moses, Columbia, Southern Okanagan, and Sinixt. And from my mother, I have diverse European heritage, but predominantly French, Irish, and Scottish. So I come here from a lot of different perspectives and background and experience. I've worked in the fields of cultural, natural resources, and environmental law and policy for the last 24 years, since I was 14 years old. Not gonna have you guys do the math on that, so let's continue. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and we look forward to integrating you even further into the work of the ACHP, and I encourage our other members to reach out to our new ones and say hello. Turning now to the next item on the agenda, which is reflections on our site visit yesterday. First, I want to thank Beth Savage and the General Services Administration staff, as well as Trey Watkins and the Department of Homeland Security staff for hosting us on the St. Elizabeth campus yesterday for a nice and very cool and breezy tour. I wanted to start with a quote from Dr. Charles Henry Nichols, who was, I believe, the first superintendent of the hospital that used to sit on that site. It's a bit of a long quote, but it's just 2 sentences. Now, nothing gratifies the taste and spontaneously enlists the attention of so large a class of persons as combinations of beautiful natural scenery, varied and enriched by the hand of man. And it may be asserted with much confidence that the expenditure of $1,000 each year directed to the single object of promoting the healthy mental occupation of 100 insane persons with either amusements or labor would not be so effectual in recalling reason to its throne as will the grand panorama of nature and of art, which the peculiar position of the site chosen so happily commands. The shifting incidents of the navigation of the Potomac, the flight of the railroad cars to and from the city, the operations at the Navy Yard, will continually renew and vary the interest of the scene. So the site itself, designated as a National Historic Landmark, first saw life in the 1850s. It's a huge campus, originally designated to serve the mental health needs of veterans and military personnel and DC residents. Just to give you a sense of scale, today on the campus there's about 1 million square feet of buildings. We did not tour all of them, but we did see a few. And it bears noting that rehabilitation of a campus of that size is a huge effort. And both GSA and DHS should be commended on the attention that they paid to the details and should be praised for their investment, which has been sizable. ACHP, for those online, has named St. Elizabeth as one of its success stories, and I encourage you to view the write-up on our website. On our tour, we visited both phenomenally beautiful new buildings that were nestled neatly into the site, as well as I said, a few old buildings, historic buildings. The site remains under development, and one of the things that I noticed on our tour was that some of the smaller buildings are maybe going to be in later phases. I think that phasing speaks to the difficulties sometimes federal agencies have in rehabilitating some small buildings, something we've seen and discussed at Fort McNair as well. We got around campus with a bus, and one question you might ask is why were we on a bus? Not necessarily because the site itself is so large, but because yesterday's temperatures exceeded 100 degrees. In DC, we are having the hottest summer ever, and it reflects the fact that climate change is changing the way we live and is changing and affecting the historic places around us. At the St. Elizabeth's campus, towards the end of the tour, we learned about a number of sustainability initiatives that have been integrated onto the site. One of the largest green roofs in the world, solar panels, native plants, green stormwater infrastructure, and a shuttle bus system. There are LEED certified buildings, including the utility plant. And when we visited the center building, I noticed that just looking up, the process of replacing the light fixtures and the lighting there was underway, looking at least to the naked eye from incandescents to energy efficient bulbs. Those efforts are about to accelerate on the St. Elizabeth's campus, given the Biden administration's investment through the Inflation Reduction Act of nearly $300 million on the site. And what that means is we're going to see more Section 106 reviews on that site. With that on the horizon, DHS has developed, and by the way, these are not DHS talking points. These are my genuine observations. DHS has developed a nationwide programmatic agreement along with the ACHP and the National Conference of State Historic Preservation Officers that I believe is a truly groundbreaking model document for the ways that federal agencies can address energy efficiency, climate adaptation, and water efficiency at federal sites. So I want to point out that document for those who haven't seen it yet. I may mention it a little bit later when we talk about program comments, but kudos to Jen Haas and the our Federal Preservation Officer and the DHS leadership, as well as Nick Schippo for that document. The quote I read from the beginning is really about evolution. So it talks about shifting incidents that will renew and vary the interest of the scene. I think we saw that yesterday at the St. Elizabeth campus, combining new art, new buildings, historic preservation, sustainability, and more. And I think it really, again, reminds us that as preservationists, we have to be adaptable to change. So those are my observations, but I'd actually like to call on Susan Barnes, a representative of the ACHP Foundation, and someone who, as the prior vice chair of the ACHP, actually participated in an expert panel a few years ago to help to advise on the development of that campus and to hear what your observations are. You might need to turn your mic on.
Oh, there we go. Is that better? Thank you, Chair Bronin. Yes, thank you for not saying the year. I will tell you, it was 2007, 2008, so we are going back in the archives. But I will say, knowing and having visited that campus at that time when the programmatic agreement was being developed with the ACHP, that it was a situation and site that was in dire distress. I mean, I can remember walking to like the central building, it was referenced just a few moments ago, and there were pigeons flying around, and there was a lot of pigeon excrement piled in the corners. I mean, it was not only not a building in good shape, but was truly a health hazard. When visiting yesterday, it is evolutionary. Many, like the center building, which has had 7 additions over its time from 1850s up until about 40 years later, it's been fully restored. But I say restored and put that in quotations because the inside was totally readapted while maintaining the exterior of the building. And I think that's a credit not only to the programmatic agreement, but also to DHS and GSA for being inventive, being creative in how you use a building that's now, over 150, almost 175 years old, and in order to meet 21st century needs. I also thought it was very incredible we made a reference of new buildings that were built in the last several years and integrated into the site. And the U.S. Coast Guard location, which is the one you meet upon when you first come into the site from the main entrance, is not only very new age, eclectic in its design, but it also blends in. And I think here again, credit and forethought needs to be given in that it was thought through before it was executed. And so while there's many more buildings yet to do, and particularly the smaller buildings, I am very confident that same measure of intelligence, thought, and vision will continue. So it's not a before and after, like yesterday was the after. It's a work in progress, but it's truly an exemplary example of how agencies have come together and work for the betterment of our national heritage.
Thank you. And if anybody else would like to make any observations, happy to entertain those now. Again, thank you to all the staff across 3 different agencies that helped to coordinate our visit. Turning now to the next agenda item, we always have a quick chair's report so that in case you, didn't get enough at our committee meetings, wanted to just talk a little bit about what we're doing and some other recent activities. So policy statements, we are working a lot on an implementation. We're going to talk a bit about that. On the Indigenous Knowledge Policy Statement, one of the things that I've had the opportunity to do through the State Department's Cultural Heritage Coordinating Committee is advise on some of the G20 cultural ministerial issues, including a declaration that may be adopted at an upcoming meeting. I encourage anybody who's interested in that conversation to please reach out to me, but there's plenty of references to Indigenous knowledge that are being discussed at the international scale, and I'm trying to keep tabs on that and be involved in that conversation. With regard to the burial grounds policy statement, I wanted to flag a recent meeting that we held with leaders across academia, the nonprofit world, and advocates who have been involved in the preservation of African American burial grounds. I want to thank Dr. Carmen Jordan Cox for helping to inspire and attending the meeting as well, and our equity officer, Kendra Tashome and Drew Knoll, for leading on this. We need to do more on trying to implement the burial grounds policy statement, and this is one thing that I'm hoping to continue our commitment to as council members, and so stay tuned for a little bit more. I wanted to mention too that there's been a lot of activity on state and local policy advising. The Connecticut bill that we discussed as a council and we opined on officially was withdrawn, and I guess a diminished version was put into the budget. There's still an appeals process, as was discussed before, but some of the more problematic provisions have been removed. Similarly, in North Carolina, thank you to Ramona Bartos and Eric Schein, as well as NAFPO, for raising our awareness of this issue. A bill that we had our eyes on that would have also hurt historic tribal and archaeological sites was withdrawn. I think in both of those instances, we see some increasing activity by state legislatures to try to limit protections for historic sites. And I'm appreciative of everybody's efforts to stay vigilant on that, and we'll keep folks posted. In California, too, we continue to make ourselves available as folks work on multiple bills. So between our policy office, myself, and staff, we've been working on at least keeping tabs on, working with statewide and local preservationists on a couple of bills, particularly those that would support office to residential conversions. I did have an op-ed in the San Diego Tribune last week or the prior week praising the California SHPO, Jully Polanco, the efforts in a few cities across California that are actually doing things right on adaptive reuse. I think it's important for us to promote best practices that are consistent with our housing and policy statements. You already heard a bit about the New York City Roundtable, where we tried to bring folks together. But I also testified about the ACHP housing policy statement in a live hearing in New York City on the City of Yes. I was virtual, but the hearing was live, about zoning amendments that are attempting to, in various ways, actually achieve some of the stated provisions in our policy statement that we've said would help historic preservation. So just in terms of speaking and travel, we talked about the New York City event. I'll be in Chicago tomorrow. I'll talk a little bit more about upcoming events. But one that really struck me was a visit last week to Venice, Italy, unrelated to not ACHP travel, but I'm an advisor to the European Heritage Hub, and one of the coordinators of that hub is based in Venice. As you probably know, the city has been for years under threat of rising seas, and the heritage there is internationally significant, and so much attention has been placed on that. We did a panel event with the Venice Sustainability Foundation, local leaders, an insurance company, which has a lot of interest in climate change, of course. And one of the things that struck me was how now that these walls, the Mose system has been built and Venice no longer floods, everybody's started to see a future for the city. The kind of investment that they have put into Venice is not the kind of investment we can put into every site, just like the kind of investment we saw at St. Elizabeth's isn't the kind of investment we can put in every site. But the lesson to me in that conversation was that there are places, both of the significance internationally as Venice, but also to people in everyday communities who are seeing the impacts of climate change on their historic places, and we need to continue to work to do what we can to have a response. I'll talk a little bit more at the end of the meeting about an upcoming conference we have on international climate action, but I think I'm going to turn it over to Reed for his comments.
Thank you, Chair Bronin, and good morning, everybody. It's great to see you and great to be back in this beautiful room. Feels sort of like being home. And I wanted to just acknowledge that we, up until about 3 months ago, had hoped this meeting would be happening in Denver. But in part because of the budget report that I'm about to get you to provide to you and limitations in our funding, we had to pull back and seek a slightly more affordable alternative. But it's great to be here, and I hope that at some point we can make it back to Denver. I wanted to just give you a quick report both on budget matters and on personnel matters. I wanted to just start by acknowledging that operations in 2024 continue. We're on target to end our budget year as close to a zero closeout as we can. Obviously, because of limitations in our current funding, we're not in a position to have a surplus, but we've been spending wisely, and I think we should be fine for the remainder of this year. For FY 2025, we had requested significantly more funding than we're currently operating under. We had requested $9.544 million. Not a lot to many agencies out there, but certainly an increase and a substantial amount for us. That increase in funding would provide us, among other things, full funding for the intern program, some critical augmentations in our IT department, full payroll amounts for everybody on staff, and funding a number of current temporary positions more permanently. So that was the request that went in. I think, as all of our federal colleagues know, we're still waiting to hear from Congress about our, how we will fare in that request. I will note that we just recently saw a number from the House that was substantially lower. In fact, $1.169 million less than we had requested. That's just from the House. Haven't heard from the Senate yet, but we're hopeful that that number will come up and that we'll be able to continue operations at least in the capacity that we're in now. I also wanted to just acknowledge that we're actively working now on our FY 2026 estimate. I can't divulge the specific amount of that yet. It's due in early September, but I wanted to just acknowledge that it'll be very similar and roughly analogous to our FY 2025 request, which I just summarized for you. So more details on that as the budget climate evolves. I also wanted to just quickly summarize for you a number of personnel updates. Before I do that, I just want to acknowledge that we had in the past typically only seen 1 or 2 changes a year in our staffing. And so when we did these updates, when the executive director was able to provide these updates, we were able to spend a little bit of time on each person. We're now, I think, and this is tremendously good fortune, seeing so many people come into the agency, so many new staff, that I'm going to simply list them and move fairly quickly because it's a pretty extensive list. And as I mentioned, I think very good fortune for us that we've been able to bring on so many talented people. So I just wanted to acknowledge that these are changes since I last reported to you in March, which are pretty substantial for us. I wanted to start by welcoming Jeffrey Alvey as our new training specialist in our Office of Federal Agency Programs. I wanted to welcome Catherine Klein as a historic preservation specialist in our OFAP office as well. I also wanted to acknowledge Rodney Parker Jr., who is our new BLM liaison in our OFAP office as well. And moving on, I wanted to welcome Sarah Beamers, who is our first SHPO liaison working in the Office of Federal Agency Programs. Also, Alex Toprak has joined OFAP as an assistant training specialist. And in OGC, we have Catherine Orr, our permitting attorney, who's joined us. So welcome to all of you. If any of you are in the audience here, please wave. Okay, we've got one back there. All right, and I'm sure others are tuning in online. So welcome to all of you. I also wanted to just acknowledge that we have 8 summer interns, mostly chair interns, and 2 in our Office of Communication, Education, and Outreach. It's great to have another full complement of interns, and we welcome you as well. If any are in the room here, please wave. All right, we've got a few waves back there. It's great to have you, and welcome to the ACHP. We will work to provide more information about all those staff to you in the future. Thank you, Chair.
Great. Thank you so much for that report. And thank you in particular to Javier Marquez in his absence for handling all of those staff HR and onboarding issues, and to all of the office directors who have been working really hard on hiring. Okay, so with that, I wanted to move on to the Regulations and Governance Committee report, and I think I'm going to start here, and then I'll turn to you after the discussion. Is that right?
Yes, that's
okay.
correct.
All right, great. So the first item on that is the Chair's initiative on government-wide program comments. These we've been talking about for a couple months now, and in the last meeting that we had, when I gave a year-end report, I talked about the need for the ACHP to think bigger about what preservation can do and be, and how we as an agency can think even bigger than what we've done before. And in light of our policy statements adopted last year on climate change and historic preservation, and housing and historic preservation, where we recognize that a climate change response and a preservationist involvement in addressing issues related to the nation's housing needs required our attention and required our action. Reading those policy statements, which were adopted in July and December, first climate, second housing, it really struck me, and I know we all voted on those, but it struck me that those policy statements really did compel action, both speaking specifically about changes to our Section 106 options, expanding the ways that we consider, expanding the ways that we use the Section 106 process to both advance historic preservation goals and housing and climate change response priorities, and even offering some specifics about the types of activities that should be covered as we think about Section 106 responses. Some of those responses could potentially have been done through regulations change, but we have had conversations about not doing that. So what we are really bound to, or sort of, I think, inspired to look at is the opportunity in program alternatives. After discussion with a number of federal agency representatives, members, and the Executive Office of the President, which has been involved in these discussions, their climate, housing, and infrastructure offices, I think, as we've talked about at the committee meetings, that we should consider drafting government-wide program comments on 4 topics: housing, climate-friendly transportation, which is a phrase that we used in our climate change policy statement, clean energy, and energy efficiency. And to that end, we have started that process of talking about it with the public, holding meetings, conversing about it as members, and trying to figure out what we can draw from as we develop such documents. We did have a number of comments that we received through an open call for comments as well as in-person meetings. We were fortunate to hear from a number of state historic preservation officers, from nonprofit organizations involved in housing and transportation, from individuals, and from representatives of federal agencies. And certainly those comments were all over the map. In terms of what they focused on, and because we just really presented conceptual ideas. But in really looking at them, it seemed like even those comments that were somewhat hesitant to consider such a big initiative still recognized that there was some value in clarity, in streamlining, and also recognized that there were lots of templates to follow, particularly in housing, and transportation, and now energy efficiency, with, among other prior program alternatives, the DHS nationwide programmatic agreement that I mentioned earlier. Clean energy may be the one where there's not so many templates or prior models to follow, but we learned a lot through that very preliminary call for public comments. So as I announced or discussed last week at our committee meetings, I do think that we should develop text for these, ideas for these. I have a very strong personal commitment to see this discussion be a robust discussion among members, be a robust discussion among preservationists, but also be a robust discussion among those who don't typically participate in our conversations. So one of the things that the interns, Reed has mentioned, have been working on is developing lists of organizations that we can reach out to about these ideas. One of the things that our draft equity plan calls for is a particular focus and directed outreach to communities that are underserved and communities with environmental justice concerns. We, of course, continue to maintain our commitment and our government-to-government relationship with tribes and our commitment to Native Hawaiian organizations. And I think what I would love to see as we discuss the opportunity to develop these kinds of documents is the kind of public engagement that we haven't seen before on important topics at the intersection of preservation and these other cultural values. You've heard me say before that the National Historic Preservation Act requires us to think about preservation in light of the things that preservation can bring to our community, our society, our economy, our environment, and to people, most importantly. So I want to continue to, raise that really sentiment that has always been embedded in the National Historic Preservation Act, and to note that I think that we, as we start to develop these with your input, with input from the public, that we will have your support and will move forward on them rather quickly. As we saw yesterday at our tour, climate change is here, it's real. As we know from driving around DC, the housing needs are real as well. So to the extent that preservation can help to be part of that solution, we need to figure that out and take a leadership role. So with that, I think I'm going to turn it over to our vice chair for a few comments, and then we'll open the floor.
Great. Thank you, Chair Bronin. Everyone hear me? That's good. Okay, thank you, Chair Bronin. Members appreciated learning more about your interest in these efforts. We also had the pleasure of welcoming Zoe Jacobs, a Deputy Chief of Staff in the Executive Office of the President, to the meeting. She noted administration sees the next few months as critical to implementing numerous infrastructure initiatives. In discussing the 4 proposed program comments, members highlighted the critical role of the SHPOs in the Section 106 process. Training both in Section 106 and relevant program alternatives was also noted as an important and necessary part of any potential solution. Members also commented on the need for an appropriate amount of time to be provided to consulting parties, both to consult and to comment on any potential draft program comments. It is clear that there's a need to balance any programmatic solution with a consultation plan that is appropriate to the subject matter and the scope of the category of potential undertakings. HUD offered its assistance in drafting any materials, an offer that is greatly appreciated, and noted its previous interest in finding a programmatic solution for housing-related undertakings. I and we hope to hear from the other members today so that the Regulations and Governance Committee can be prepared to assist Chair Bronin, as you've heard, as needed.
Okay, thank you so much. And maybe we should invite HUD to say a comment, since they're part of the effort here. And also just to note, as Kristen is coming to the mic, that we have already been working as staff to try to develop those plans, to develop timelines for these documents. And I think what we heard both in the public sessions and from members is that it would be great to have something to respond to rather than just the concepts. And so we're also working to develop at least a framework of ideas to try to move around. So with that, I will turn to Kristen, and then we can open it up to others.
Thank you, Chair Bronin. And very much appreciate your opening remarks as we talk about the regulations and governance discussions that happened last week. HUD supports ACHP's efforts to streamline the review of redundant and at times repetitive activities for housing related to both energy efficiency upgrades, hazardous material abatement, upgrades for livability and accessibility. The initial safeguards for avoiding ground disturbing activities and also treating separately properties like National Historic Landmarks, as we discussed last week, is a good boundary. HUD is taking very seriously also striking that balance between how we think about these redundant and repetitive activities and how we think about, as you also mentioned, our relationships and the critical consultation requirements that we hold dear as we think about our relationships with our federally recognized tribes, NHOs, et cetera. As you know, HUD communicated to the ACHP on June 11th an intent to develop a program comment for public housing specifically. HUD has since agreed to work with the ACHP on a program comment that could have broader implications for all federal agencies dealing with similar challenges. We look forward to contributing to the draft of the program comment and aligning with ACHP's efforts and vision from the policy statement. With that being said, we have already conducted one listening session prior to the ACHP's intent to move forward more broadly, with SHPOs invited to share their initial thoughts with us on a program comment of this kind. In addition, we very much appreciate and welcome the ACHP's willingness to, as you said, open up our discussion and dialogue beyond the historic preservation professionals that we also must lean on for perspective moving forward. There are many partners in this world that have not been as vocal for a host of different reasons. And so as the ACHP has embarked on this, we have actively engaged with groups such as the Council for Large Public Housing Authorities, the National Association of Housing and Redevelopment Officials, Public Housing Authority Directors Associations, and also the National Community Development Association and Council of State Community Development Agencies to engage with them. They have not been vocal in these conversations before, and I promise you they have things to say on behalf of their members. And I look forward to their participation as we continue moving forward. The one additional piece I would offer is, as we look at these 4 program comments, one of the things on my mind, of course, is this energy efficiency priority and the energy efficiency and clean energy work and how that plays into housing. And so as we continue moving forward, certainly we don't want these program comments to be repetitive, but I think important as the conversations proceed in understanding how to ensure we are achieving the needs of housing as it relates to clean energy and energy efficiency, though those in their initial intent may be broader. So with that, I will yield back and thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. And I want to recognize for the record and for Shayla that our USDA representative has been seated. Welcome and thank you for being here. Yes, Dr. Bartos.
Thank you, Chair Bronin, and good morning, everyone. It's wonderful to see you, especially in this august place, which I think will elevate our conversations even beyond where they normally are. In our committee meetings, we offered, the National Conference of State Historic Preservation Officers, and we offered some comments during the committee meetings. Is that better? Okay, very good, thank you. During the committee meetings with our perspective on this, and I just want to, for everyone, especially our newer members, I represent an organization of public servants who were have been appointed by 59 governors, states and territories. And we're in a very unique position, I think, to be able to see from our perspective across the federal family all of the different ways that projects come to us for our review under the National Historic Preservation Act. And I think as a result, we can offer I think we all recognize this is a very nuanced discussion, and there's not one single path to streamline and make efficient. But I will say, I think we will all agree, we want to guard jealously the public's access to consultation. We do not want to retard our efforts going backwards in time to 1965 and in the past, 1966 being the adoption by our Congress of the National Historic Preservation Act. We want people to be able to influence and shape what the federal government is proposing to do in their communities, and at the same time, make it easier for our citizens to access these very programs. Some of the things that we have also offered as thoughts on this is the ACHP, I think, would be well within its rights to set some minimum submission standards for federal agencies. We see a variety of things coming to our office, including the manager of a health clinic trying to figure out how to put together a Section 106 submission. That's not that person's normal workload. That's under other duties assigned. And the ACHP has a very robust training, but how do we help that person know, as part of the litany, the laundry list of things that they have to submit to get that federal grant, how do they do 106, and how can we make it easy for them to find that assistance and follow the rules? Training, I'm very excited to hear there's going to be further interest in training. We've been speaking with HUD very informally and hope to formalize that some more. How can we help local governments who are providing public housing and they have all the other things that they need to worry about? And again, Section 106 is just one piece of the puzzle. So I think there's some things outside of just a document that can help address some of these issues. I think it's more policy related and also just very people-oriented. Because again, the National Historic Preservation Act, I'm always very inspired to go back and read the policies that are outlined there. The fact that our historic places need to continue to provide a sense of orientation to our fellow citizens, to ourselves, and to have a productive harmony between the historic place and our advancements as we progress into more and more modern advancement. But I do ask that as we consider these potential solutions, and again, I don't think there's just one bucket of solutions here, that we don't lose ourselves as a people in our efforts to advance our country into new things, because people really, there are a lot of monumental infrastructure projects that are needed. And our friends at DOT are bringing those to us. We have rail coming in North Carolina. They'll help me get to DC a little faster, which I'm appreciative of. But at the same time, that is exactly why the National Historic Preservation Act was passed, so that these infrastructure projects, people are not an afterthought. They're very much at the forefront of what is in play here. So I hope you'll all consider that as we continue to deliberate this. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you so much for your comments, and just wanting to recognize again for the new members, as you did, that the State Historic Preservation Officers play a hugely significant role in the Section 106 process and are knowledgeable about not just the process but the substance. And I think that relationship presents a real opportunity because the SHPOs have tried different things in these areas and have developed some models for the kinds of activities that the public is interested in engaging in, and maybe the kinds of things like weather stripping and interior replacements of plumbing fixtures that might not have the same imperative and interest in public engagement. And I think part of what we will rely on NCSHPO and of course all of our members to do is to identify those activities where we don't necessarily think that same kind of public engagement is needed, drawing from our prior examples, so that both SHPOs and the public can focus on those projects that really matter and that really cut at those issues of looking at preservation and how it works in matters that are not routine, in matters that are more challenging. So some of this is the advice that you will give us about the kinds of resources from an administrative level that you think are worth devoting both from a staff level at state historic preservation officers and the level of engagement that the public may desire. So I think defining those activities is important, and one of the reasons why I think that starting to develop those lists of activities sooner rather than later would be extremely meaningful is so that we could just start going back and forth on those kinds of details. And so I'm really looking forward to that opportunity to draw from. And I think anything that we do end up putting out will have, the majority of it, I think, will be a sort of cut and paste job. We'll be drawing from some of the things that we've done from the past, building on those and expanding those. And that's one of the advantages of how we've addressed program alternatives in the past. We've let 1,000 flowers bloom. They have bloomed. We have a lot of different models to choose from. And I think the important thing for this body is to try to identify which ones of those models do we want to choose going forward in these different regards. Yes.
Thank you. So I understand the need and the intent of these program alternatives, and I encourage the ACHP staff to ensure that the concerns and issues brought forward by Indian tribes and Native Hawaiian organizations are addressed as part of this effort, including any concerns that may be raised about the timeline for development of them. It does concern me that there were no attendees in the 2 listening sessions that were held specifically for Indian tribes and NHOs. And for this reason, I think I'd like to be briefed on specifics of that outreach effort and what the consultation plan is moving forward for the program comments and feedback from tribes and NHOs in this effort as well. And one of the requests, I think, in the meeting book materials was input about what can be done to expand public engagement. So to that end, I recommend that all tribal colleges and universities, as well as the BIA branch of Tribal Climate Resilience and the regional USGS Climate Adaptation Science Centers be included in the listserv for these meeting notices. Maybe they already were, I don't know. But I think that would be a really good place to start to get some very specific feedback that's targeted to experts, targeted to those tribal experts that work in this field. And I do have more specific comments and recommendations and inquiries, which I'll be forwarding to you, Chair Bronin and Committee Chair Tannenbaum, and staff offline.
Excellent. Thank you so much for those comments. And as I think some of the discussions may have started, well, I mean, just to answer your question about the kind of outreach, we're happy to provide what we did for these couple of meetings that we held, as you mentioned, or that we opened for specifically for Indian tribes and Native Hawaiian organizations. But I believe those went out on our normal channels. And as you saw in attending the NHO exemption meeting, there was a lot of attendance for that, and no attendance by tribes for and NHOs for the preliminary discussions on these. I think part of, at least from what I've experienced in my time here, sometimes you do get a lot of attendance, certainly for things like the NTIA broadband comment, which had a pretty clear potential impact on tribal lands. And sometimes we have closed other meetings with no attendees, or maybe just one attendee. In fact, we had a couple of meetings where we had just one attendee. So it really varies, and we certainly work with NAFPO as well to kind of gauge too, if there's something that's really, really important and relevant and a live issue, we certainly hear a lot from NAFPO. There may have been another thing at work here, which is there wasn't anything for them to respond to, and that the public website that was out was a conceptual one that actually spoke in a couple of places about the types of activities and the hope that, for example, in the clean energy context, there would not be landscape scale projects. And so it could have just been that some tribes, who of course are extremely busy and have a lot of things going on, looked at that and said, well, maybe this is not one of those things. But we can talk a little bit more about that, and I do think we will get engagement once we have something for tribes and NHOs to respond to. I do want to mention two other things that are relevant, perhaps. One is that we are developing an equity plan. We are holding the tribal listening sessions on that later in August. We had a mid-August date. We're moving it by a week. But we are, I think that issue of engagement and involvement is top of mind because we do want to see robust engagement. And then lastly, OTIP, the Office of Tribal Indigenous Peoples, it has consultation at the fore, and in fact, just assigned one of our interns to look to see if they could scour federal agency websites and federal government clearinghouse sites to learn more about what federal agencies are doing on consultation planning and to see if there's anything that we can do better. So there's a lot going on, I think, in this space, and I completely agree with you that it would be great to have robust engagement and to really help to both develop these program comments with the idea of minimizing impacts on tribal on properties of religious and cultural significance, on areas where tribes and Native Hawaiian organizations have, at least in the past, expressed interest, and to take all of that feedback to any new things that arise, any comments. We certainly have been trying to do that in the NHO exemption, which we'll talk about later, and I think we will adhere to that with this process. So now that you're the tribal member, you're going to get a chance to help us with that, and I think new ways of doing that will be great. We do have, I think, one of the best listservs of tribal leaders and of tribal historic preservation officers across federal government, so thanks to our staff that continues to keep that updated. Yes, thank you.
Chair Bronin, I have an administrative point, and this might be more for Reed. This might be more, yeah, there we go. Might be more for Reed. I guess I know that there were a lot of comments that were brought forward in written form. I think NAFPO and others, the National Trust, had letters which we were provided by them. Is it possible for us in future meetings, in addition to the great staff memo, which is sort of I'll say the Cliff Notes version of that, is it possible for the members to have brought forward to them all of the comments so that we can read those in raw form, if you will? I know that might not be everyone's cup of tea to review all of that, but I would welcome that opportunity because I think there's a lot of nuances that would be brought forward in those actual letters on behalf of the agency, on behalf of the organization. I think that would make the conversation even more robust, and I would welcome that if that could somehow be provided to us at future meetings for this and other topics.
Yes, we'd be happy to do that. In fact, we did something analogous just a few days ago with the NHO exemption as well. We'll typically take the comments, compile them, place them on a drive, and then provide access to you all for that. So we'll absolutely do that going forward.
I'd like just to see the letters as well as if you have a matrix or something like that. I know that's oftentimes used for Federal Register kind of things, but I guess I just want to read. I want to read the novel, not just the Cliff Notes.
Only the people in this room would take that to the beach.
All right, indeed.
Summer reading.
Thank you.
Any other comments on this as we?
Chair Bronin, also
Yes, thank you, Monica.
have a similar, different administrative question, and this is related to the public relations firm that was hired a few months back. So I was just curious about the status of where they are and their role in helping to think about a larger vision on engagement and outreach around these efforts.
Thank you. I believe that is probably going to be our topic over the next couple of weeks. For those new members, we have brought in some outside assistance to help to communicate what the ACHP is doing to the public to ensure that we have the most robust engagement that we can. That has been a good investment in that we, I think, have helped both for ourselves understand what strategies can be used to talk about the ACHP, but also to use contacts that we don't have necessarily at the ACHP with our tiny staff to try to expand awareness about the activities of the federal government with regard to historic preservation. On this, I mean, I think, Reed, this is a topic that we're going to be discussing with them in the weeks ahead. I think it'll be a top priority, particularly as we open up the discussion to the public and invite that kind of feedback. I know, too, that we'll get support from hopefully both other federal agencies and potentially the White House to the extent that we can interest them in our tiny little agency and what we're doing. It certainly does fit into broader discussions that are happening across the administration on permitting processes that balance environmental justice, social and economic goals, and other important values, in our case, historic preservation. So stay tuned for that. But I do think we'll get a bit of outside help, both from our consultants and by others. And I think Kristen's comments about HUD's outreach to the organizations that are relevant to housing is something that we want to replicate across these other program comment discussions. So there are certainly organizations, nonprofit organizations that focus on energy efficiency, like Architecture 2030 just comes to mind on that front. There are organizations that focus on active transportation. Assistant Secretary Coase would know all of those, but organizations like America Walks, Transportation for America, and those kinds of organizations that have experience, particularly in the kinds of contexts and environments we're talking about, and the kinds of projects that we defined ourselves in the climate-friendly transportation parenthetical in our climate change and historic preservation policy statement. So we're going to, we've already reached out to some of those organizations, letting them know that this is coming. I think part of the baseline for those organizations is, what is Section 106? Why does it matter? Well, it matters because it governs 120,000 federal agency actions every year. And because of the increasing investment in all of these areas, we are going to see much more use of it. And so we need to have a good, solid, consistent approach on those topics. And I think those, if we can maybe communicate those simple ideas, then I think at some point we can really start the engagement with them on the details. So thank you for that. And by the way, as our communications, education and outreach former committee chair, I think we'll be relying on you too for that, especially given your strong social media presence and connections. So that's a great question, and we will follow up with you. Yes, this is Deputy Secretary Martinez. Deputy Assistant Secretary Martinez.
Thank you, Chair Bronin. Chair Marchand mentioned a couple of Department of the Interior bureaus that may have some resources to add to this conversation. Feel free to contact me if I can help make those Department of Interior assets available. And then just wanted to close by mentioning that on April April 15th of this year, the National Park Service launched a new website that gathers in one place all existing National Park Service guidance regarding the treatment of historic buildings and sustainability, energy efficiency, climate change, resilience to natural hazards, and this includes new guidance on these topics. Please visit nps.gov, and the program is technical preservation services. Just let us know how we can bring these Department of Interior assets to help with this conversation.
Thank you so much. And Amelia, maybe we can both follow up with DOI on this. And congratulations on the launch of that resource, which will be very valuable as we do this, and to the general public as well. Any other comments? Okay, I think with that, we will turn to the next agenda item, and just to say, you know, we will try to keep this conversation going. As I told Reed earlier this week, this is my main focus for the rest of the year, so this will get my 100%, or at least 99% full attention, and I encourage any member to reach out to me at any time to hear the latest, to get involved with questions or concerns. We'll turn back to Jordan.
Okay, so I think we're going on to our next status of our nationwide program alternatives under development, I believe. And I know you've all read through them. Ramona, you have plenty to add to your beach reading. And let me just take this opportunity to thank the committee members. As I'm reporting on the results of the committee meetings, we had a terrific attendance at the last committee meeting. It was sitting room only, because it was all virtual. But I really appreciate your involvement. I really do. That makes such a difference. And so during our committee meeting, we heard from the National Park Service. And National Park Service, get ready. I want to hear from you again after my remarks on its efforts to develop a program comment for its Mission 66 facilities, which constitute approximately 25% of its properties. This is an area of great interest to me as I, as a youngster, went to many national parks and always loved to see the sign saying Mission 66. At first I thought it was all about missions. I learned it wasn't. But glad to see this and where this goes. Over the last year, the Park Service has been carefully consulting on this effort, which will provide an optional compliance tool for meeting its Section 106 responsibilities. The Park Service is in the process of preparing the program comment for submittal to the ACHP with a plan that would then be before the membership this fall for our consideration, for your consideration and vote. Members also heard from the VA, and be ready for a VA comment, my friend. A member from the VA, which outlines its interest in pursuing 2 nationwide programmatic agreements and a standard treatment. The programmatic agreements would address the VA's leasing program and its state home construction grant program, while the standard treatment would address adverse effects at national cemeteries. So let's begin with the NPS, and would you like to make a statement, Member Martinez?
Thanks, Chair Tiedemann. What I'd like to do is call the Associate Director from the National Park Service, Joy Beasley, to the table to give some remarks on this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you, Deputy Assistant Secretary Martinez, and thank you, Jordan, for that good summary and overview of our program comment. This is something that we've been working on for well over a year. We've been working very closely with the Advisory Council on the development of the program comment and have consulted extensively, both internally with our own stakeholders and also with other consulting parties, tribes, et cetera. So this is a really important effort for us. The National Park Service has been the beneficiary of a number of appropriations over the past several years that are aimed at helping us address our deferred maintenance backlog, and meet our own employee housing shortage, address our accessibility requirements, and so forth. So over the next several years, we have funding coming to us to the tune of close to $2 billion So certainly the Congress has seen the great need that we have out there to make sure that we're able to better serve the over 350 million people who visit parks every year, as well as provide the infrastructure and the staffing that we need to meet those visitor needs. So this program comment is truly preservation focused. What we are trying to do is have a way to ensure that we can direct these funds towards our existing historic assets, including those that date to the Mission 66 era. Those represent about a quarter of our total built infrastructure, but the vast majority of those resources are unevaluated. So we can't use, for example, our 2008 programmatic agreement to meet our compliance responsibilities. So certainly if we're not able to obligate and expend these funds, we will lose them. So that's why this is really important to us, and our goal here is to be able to make these historic assets more in better condition, to make them adaptable for modern needs, to make them more accessible, and to make sure that they can continue to serve us for decades to come. So I really appreciated the opportunity to make a presentation at the committee meetings last week. I wanted for you all to be able to hear from us directly on this, to understand how important to us this actually is, and we are hopeful that we will very shortly finalize our proposal, submit that to the advisory council, and we look forward to hopefully being able to move this forward with all of y'all's help. So thank you.
Thank you, Joy. Thank you very much. Okay, any questions for Joy? Yes.
I just have a comment, which is, as you know, last summer I visited Grand Teton National Park and toured the park with the superintendent. I believe that's the park with the largest number of Mission, or one of the largest numbers of Mission 66 resources. I do think that this, the need for this is great for all the reasons that Joy mentioned. But thinking about some of the other issues that we've talked about, including in that case the need to provide housing on the site, the need to upgrade facilities, the need to improve the visitor experience, I think was really really hit home in a vast park like that. So just encourage members to continue to keep your eye on this. We will, I believe, have a vote on it in the relatively near future, and just wanted to mention that if you've been in our parks recently, and you've seen some of these facilities, it's a great time to spend that money and upgrade them. And I hope too that there's of course in the Mission 66 program, there's a focus on cars and vehicular access. So thinking about everything that DOT and others are doing on active transportation, as we think about those vehicle access ways, the opportunity to also integrate pedestrian infrastructure and biking infrastructure is a good one. So we look forward to that. We look forward to the vote, and thank you for all your work on that.
Great. Thank you.
Jordan, I have a quick question.
Oh, yes.
Thank you, Joy, for your comments. I have 2 questions for you. The $2 billion that's been allocated, is this above and beyond the Great American Outdoors Act funding, or is this a different pot of money here?
No, it's largely Great American Outdoors Act funding, but there's also some touches with the bipartisan infrastructure law, the Inflation Reduction Act, and if the Great American Outdoors Act is fully funded in 2025, that number is actually higher.
Okay.
So it's a good problem to have.
Yes, very much so. To that end, I also want to applaud the tremendous efforts of the National Park Service as a part of their Historic Preservation Training Center and how you're training the next generation of preservation trades professionals. Are they also a part of being considered a part of this this larger effort to restore these Mission 66 buildings, this a training component to expand these opportunities to to a younger generation?
Yeah, absolutely. The Historic Preservation Training Center has been critical to the overall implementation of the Great American Outdoors Act. One of the things we were able to fund through that were the maintenance advisory teams that are kind of like tiger teams that we can send out to the parks to do the actual work itself, to also train our other park-based facility maintenance staff and others in traditional trades. You're very aware of, we've got, significant sort of intake and training programs that relate specifically to advancing traditional trades, training that next generation, engaging the next generation of stewards who will care for these resources.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Great.
Yeah, I'd like to just jump in real
Yes,
quickly. Thank you. No, just appreciate hearing about that proposal. We'd love to see it. Similarly, USDA has a challenge with deferred maintenance and also with employee housing, as you know, and we're working closely together on a number of fronts. We are also considering using how best to use our existing facilities and infrastructure in order to better support access to affordable, available housing for our employees. So look forward to seeing the proposal and supporting however we can. And we're also partnering with HistoriCorps and other great partners to be able to support the next generation in caring for and maintaining these properties. So great question.
Yeah, we absolutely, we'd be happy to connect with you all on that. And I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge that we've had excellent support from one of our two ACHP liaisons specific to this effort, and that's Kirsten Koulis, who's out there. So we've had great support from the ACHP in navigating the process. Very much appreciate it.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. And now the VA, who will be?
Right here. Hey, thank you very much. I greatly appreciate the opportunity to socialize our programmatic agreements with the Regulations and Governance Committee last week. We do believe in full transparency, and it's important to communicate this early. So appreciate that opportunity. Just want to reiterate the Department of Veterans Affairs' commitment to historic preservation. We take it very seriously, and I'm very proud of the work that our Historic Preservation Office does, both for the department and in collaboration, primarily through Hector, our Federal Preservation Officer, with the committee or the council here. It's kind of unusual that we would have three, and I won't go into the details. We have established a website with the information that you can get with Hector, and he can help provide the link to that address so that the information's out there in full transparency. But I think what I'd like to highlight here amongst the group is maybe focus on one of those and kind of give the scale, because I think it's not just benefit for the federal agency, it's also benefit for the council to allow resources both within the agency and the council to be focused on the more significant historic preservation initiatives and transactional requirements that require manpower, time, and resources, and just to conduct the business. We have a large major leasing program to provide facilities to provide the care, benefits, and services to our veterans where they're needed across the nation. And to give you some context of scale, over the past 5 years, we've had 66 major lease projects across the country in most major markets to provide world-class health care to veterans where we don't have facilities to do that. So we have very recent and conclusive longitudinal data that there wasn't really an impact any historical preservation, but we've exercised the system for these. We do have a lot of historical facilities and responsibilities in the department that we could better serve our resources and time focusing on those, helping preserve those assets when we know this particular program hasn't had the impacts. And we believe that this and our other proposals will allow us to be better stewards of our resources, conducting our mission to care provide care, benefits, and services for our nation's veterans, but also our responsibilities to preserve our historical assets. But on this side of the fence in the council, it also can reduce the transactional workload. Reed talked earlier about budget challenges here. We have 3 program agreements we're proposing here that will require all the work and consultation of the staffs and eventually to make recommendations to us for a vote. But we're not the only ones. There's others this year as well. So that's a considerable amount of focus and attention and resource required just to address not only our 3, but the other federal agencies' proposals this year. So I do have some concerns about the ability for this body to transact that with all the other business in the light of potential budgetary issues. So I ask all to consider, please take a look at our website, support it. We want to hear what people have to say as soon as possible so we can address this, but I do believe, at least in the Department of Veterans Affairs, we have some good data that shows, one, we are champions for the stewardship of what we own, but we also have programs where it just hasn't been a factor, but has consumed resources. So again, I want to thank Jordan for the opportunity to socialize that with the committee, and I appreciate everybody's attention as we work through this over the next year plus, however long it takes us to consider these. And I will end the same way I started. We are absolutely committed to Historic Preservation Department of Veterans Affairs, and I think our deeds have matched our words. I just don't want to shock the system that we're asking for 3 in 1 year is not a deviation from that. So that's where I wanted to start and end, and I appreciate the council's consideration. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Michael. Questions, comments? Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Shall we keep on? Okay, moving along. This is very, very exciting too. This is the update on implementation of the nationwide cultural resource mapping initiative. In our call in May, members learned of the recent commitment from the Permitting Council to help support the first phase of this very, very ambitious effort. Since that time, staff have been doing the necessary fact-finding to prepare for this initiative, including conversations with CEQ, DOJ, and the Washington SHPO. As technology is not one of my strengths, I am now going to call on Reed to provide some further detail on just phase 1, I believe, Reed, and the plans for phase 2, and to also introduce us to the National Technical Information Service. Reed.
Yeah, thank you, Jordan. I appreciate it. Yeah, I'm very happy to report again on our efforts to develop a nationwide digital map to inform historic preservation reviews, infrastructure projects, et cetera. Very exciting area for us. I think as we talked about it in the committee report, it's an adventure. It's a great adventure, and so we're happy to be on it. I just wanted to sort of give you a little bit of context again for what we're doing and why we're doing it, and then walk you through a little bit about where we are with phase 1 and phase 2. Suffice it to say, I think we are all aware that the ACHP has always seen accessible and reliable information as absolutely essential to informing Section 106 reviews, infrastructure reviews, and the broad range of activities that are subject to Section 106 review. I think about 120,000 a year or so projects proceed through the process, and it's essential that they have access to important information to inform those reviews. And I think it's also worth acknowledging that the ACHP has for a very long time been committed to ensuring through its work with the broad range of the members here, and particularly with states and tribes, that that information is made available. That history goes back as early as the 2006 Preserve America Summit, where some of the key recommendations coming out of that summit were, among others, to invest in information systems to make them more complete, and much more recently in the workings of our Digital Information Task Force, which you chaired, Jordan. And in that circumstance, there was a lot of, I think, very important information brought forward about the need to make this information available and some key strategic goals for the ACHP. I also want to just acknowledge that we are continuing to support the augmentation, investments in, and improvements in digital information systems that already exist among states and some among tribes as well. And so nothing about our own effort is meant to detract in any way about our support as well for those, the ongoing maintenance and improvement of those systems as well. But I think, recognizing that the Inflation Reduction Act presented some really interesting opportunities for agencies to invest in environmental review capacity and other things, and recognizing also that there was no singly accessible nationwide map that provided sort of that first stop to inform federal decision-making and the development of projects, infrastructure, and beyond, we saw an opportunity to seek investments in the creation of a single digital map that would provide information about historic properties across the country, not as a replacement for the current systems among states and tribes, but as perhaps a first stop in project planning, recognizing that it would inform sort of that early, the earliest phase of project planning, and then that agencies would go on as those projects developed to also gather information from states and tribes and elsewhere. So we started off by talking a little bit with our colleagues in federal agencies, federal preservation officers, and it was clear that there was an overwhelming interest amongst federal preservation officers to see such a resource developed. So as you acknowledged, Jordan, we worked with the Federal Permitting Improvement Steering Council and sought an investment from them to develop this project in 2 phases. As you noted, we're delighted that phase 1 has been funded to the tune of about $750,000. And we are already actively working on sort of moving that phase forward. And I just want to sort of summarize real quickly. Phase 1 for us includes really beginning by surveying the data landscape, looking at current data standards and policies about using and maintaining and making data available. We recognize that there's certainly much we have to do to learn about and abide by those standards. We're also looking as part of that phase to then sort of develop a proof of concept, working with a contractor who I'll mention in a minute, not a contractor, a fellow agency, I should say, to really begin to develop sort of a proof of concept, lay out the framework for a map, a GIS-based map, and then to identify 3 federal agencies as part of this first phase who are willing to work with us to share information that they have about historic properties so that we can begin to populate the map and prove that it would work and that we can construct and then hopefully expand such a map. We would also make sure, as part of that process, that the information available on it would not include sensitive information about properties of cultural and religious significance to tribes. It would not include that information. It would also not include sensitive information about archaeological sites, which we know can sometimes be vulnerable to looting and harm if information about them is made available. And I also want to be clear that in no way would this map, just in the same way that no current state map is, in no way would this map be a substitute for tribal consultation. We would be as clear as I know our partners at the state level always are, that agencies would need to work directly with tribes and consult them to identify properties of concern and interest to tribes. So we're working, as mentioned, we're working with the National Technical Information Service, as I acknowledged in a committee meeting, an agency I didn't know about until we embarked on this adventure. It's an agency within the Department of Commerce that exists to provide assistance to agencies in building these sorts of tools. So we were very fortunate to find them, and we're already working with them. One of the advantages of working with them is that they have a bevy of contractors that they can access, and we can use that sort of that ability that they have to bring in the external experts and everybody else that's necessary to develop such a system. I also wanted to acknowledge that as part of phase 1, we've already, in addition to working with the NTIS, we met with the Washington SHPO. Many of the people around the table here know full well that they have a very sophisticated system, and so we talked with them about sort of the lessons they've learned and sort of the do's and don'ts of developing a system like that. It was very helpful. We also met with the Department of Interior and CEQ, who collaborated on developing a roughly analogous system to support the America the Beautiful initiative. And there as well learned some valuable lessons and got some great advice from them on how to proceed. So phase 1 is, again, looking at the data landscape, assessing what we need to do to condition the, sort of the transfer of information, and then beginning to identify those 3 federal agencies so that we can work with them to bring that data together and prove that the concept works. Phase 2, quite simply, a much larger phase of the project will, and is a yet to be funded phase of the project, will be us fully developing the system, working with all federal agencies to gather data that's available to them and to begin to populate the map. What we would hope as part of phase 2 as well is that in expanding the scope and the outreach of the effort, that we would be able to bring on some staff as well within the ACHP to develop and maintain the system. We're working with the Permitting Council, and we have our fingers crossed that a proposal to them will be successful, but I'm not in a position yet to announce anything about phase 2. But we're very hopeful that we'll see that funded soon. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we will also look for those longer range opportunities to maintain the system once we build it. We're estimating at this point that building it will take a minimum of 2 to 3 years. I also just wanted to acknowledge, as comments were brought up about this in the Regulations and Governments Committee, that we're already planning on sitting down and meeting with the Federal Geographic Data Committee. We know they play an important and controlling role in how data is accessed and defined and shared publicly, so we're looking forward to meeting with that committee. We'll also sit down with CEQ and compare notes about the important effort that they're undertaking about making digital information available for the relating to the NEPA process. So we've got those meetings already scheduled, and as always, we will continue to keep you up to date as we embark on this. I just want to acknowledge as well, and I think this was in the paper in your meeting book, that we would certainly welcome any information or advice that you might have on building such a system. If you have experience or advice or views about it, we would welcome that. And we're also just starting the process of identifying the 3 agencies that we would work with in phase 1 to sort of test the system and ask them to share information with us so that we could develop that proof of concept and demonstrate that it works. So again, if you have any input on those 3 agencies, we'd welcome that as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Reed. Thank you, Jordan, for your excellent committee report. I do want to just recognize yesterday, CEQ released its report to Congress on this exact topic, and ACHP plays a minor role. I don't know, Anna, if you would like to make a quick comment about that.
Yes, I'll thank you for that, and I appreciate you lifting it up on social media. We, as part of the Fiscal Responsibility Act, Congress asked CEQ to look into the ability to use technology and digital tools to improve NEPA reviews and other permitting work, and I'm very happy to say we sent that report to Congress yesterday. I think it's a great resource both for what we found over almost a year and a half of investigation on this issue of what's needed, both to improve NEPA, but I think the lessons learned will be applicable across the government, and hopefully it's a good resource for the ACHP. And we are happy to continue to partner with you and work with you on your exciting digital work as well. One thing I wanted to draw attention to for this group is a big chunk of the report also just details a lot of tools that exist within the federal government right now that may be of interest to you, both to tap into and know they're there, but also as you're thinking about your future work in bringing digital tools and technology online. Our press release and a link to the full report is available on our website. So if you go to whitehouse.gov/CEQ, you should be able to find a sort of news and update button there and find it for yourself. And of course, if I can be of any assistance, I'm happy to put you in touch with the folks who really led that effort for us, including Michael Drummond on my team, who was the lead for that project.
Great, thank you. And I can't emphasize how important the collection and use of data is in permitting processes, and for us, really trying to work on that through the initiatives that Reed describes is imperative and really a top priority. Yes.
Thank you, Chair Bronin.
Oh, sorry.
I think maybe I've been doing this for a while, and I think I've become a little bit of the historian for us. So I just want to propose something, and I also want to express some very deep concerns. First of all, back in 2018, then Chair Wayne Donaldson, and I think Jordan was the chair of what I'm getting to here, ACHP membership passed a resolution setting up a digital info task force to look at just these issues. What I am hearing instead is that this is a staff-led effort, and the proposition that a federal mapping tool would be preferable to what is already in place at the states. I'm a little puzzled why we're not even testing the feasibility of this, because I'm very appreciative of CEQ's report. We can't do anything without knowing where things are. I think give you some statistics that we have gathered amongst our membership. 68% of SHPOs have robust online GIS. Only 22%, though, have 100% of our data digitized. It's available, but people have to come in. So we need resources to digitize that data. We have it, we just need to make it more available. But 78% have 50% or more already digitized. Now, how much will this cost? Our estimate 2023 number for the entire country to build up the SHPOs to the level of what you're suggesting for a start from scratch system, which, by the way, in our state, we have a very robust system in North Carolina. Our system took us about 15 years to build from the bottom up. So if we start over from scratch, I don't know that we are gaining much efficiency. It's $38 million for the whole country for all the SHPOs. When we talk about fiscal responsibility, I know it's a lot of money, but I don't know what it would cost for the federal government to start from scratch. The other piece of it is, and I'm going to ask that Ms. Grussing also be recognized, if you don't have tribal data, if you don't have archaeological data, you just have points on a map with buildings. We can see where the buildings are. Knowing where things are that really are very crucial to project development and project delivery, that's what you need to see. And if your map only has what you can see, then your map's not really going to be as effective as you hope it will be. I'm sorry, we're here amongst colleagues, but I want to be very frank with you. The other piece of the puzzle is archaeological tribal information is confidential under state law. How do you tease that out? So what we're actually talking about doing is potentially setting up two competing systems. Who has the most authoritative data? And I can promise you, if you set this up, it has to be maintained 24 hours a day. And the states have the survey responsibility under the National Historic Preservation Act. This is an exercise in federalism that has been very successful, I think. So if we're talking about planting a new orchard, I'd rather us tend the one we already have that's been growing quite well, that needs a little bit more attention, a little bit more resources. So I would really like for us to set up a task force of the membership. And just to clue us into what that looked like, Jordan was the chair in 2018. The report is still on the Advisory Council's website. You probably can pull it up on your phone. Dorothy Lippert, many of us know Dorothy Lippert, was another public member. Department of the Interior was represented, DOT. Mr. Coase and I talked about their participation in the past briefly before he had to leave. CEQ, Ms. Cohen, was also a member of this task force, NICSHPO and NAFPO, and NAPC, which is the National Alliance of Preservation Commissions, because there's also a local component to all this. I don't hear the local component being discussed as part of a federal program. So I just really would like us to stop and think about, is this the right path forward to having a federal system, or is there another more effective, more efficient, can get it done more quickly, build on what we already have? Because I really would love to have more digital tools at the state level. I think many states have done that, and we're sort of a laboratory. The states are a laboratory of many ideas that then can come to fruition or be tested out. So having everything, all your eggs in one basket, I'm very concerned that that may be not the best path forward. And I think it's great to study this, but I think it's very important for the membership to have input in this, and that it's not something that is presented to us as a, this is the way we're going to do it, this is the fait accompli. So again, I'm great about studying things. I love to study things. I love to test concepts. But I think there's some issues that we really need to think about as a membership before we decide that there even needs to be a phase 2. So
I'd like to respond to those those comments before we turn to Valerie, if you don't mind. And just to say, you know, we did do some analysis drawing from Nick Schippo's reporting on what State Historic Preservation Offices have done, and our own analysis of what's available through State Historic Preservation Offices. And as you point out, there are a lot of differences between the systems, and a lot of differences even as to what types of data is displayed or kept. Some have local districts, some have state register districts, some have inventories, some have eligible properties.
Well, why not set up some minimum standards for us to all follow?
So this project is actually focused on, and I'm not sure if we certainly tried to clarify it at the committee meetings, is focused on those types of resources that federal agencies have deemed eligible for listing in prior Section 106 reviews. So for federal agencies who work across state lines and who need a somewhat consistent source of data, you know, this project is really envisioned to assist those agencies in another type of resource that doesn't get posted. I think the majority of states do not post the eligibility findings, at least on an online map.
I don't know that's the case, but in any case, the question of eligibility is also a moving target that needs the states to also come into play, as well as the agencies, as well as potentially National Park Service. So having this very set aside, not fully complete mapping system, I don't
think the idea for this whole effort is to try to start having a better and more complete system, as well as more consistent standards. And as you'll see after the break, we do and will continue to support investments in state historic preservation offices and their data systems. But that doesn't mean that the ACHP, as the federal agency that oversees and administers a significant federal permitting process, doesn't also have an obligation to do its part to work with our fellow federal agencies to try to put data online. So that's, I mean, that's the best I can do. You know, I think, you know, if you look at, you know, redundancies, there may or may not be redundancies.
Chair Bronin, I would say the fact that we're having such a robust discussion about this is more the reason we should have a task force so that more members can have some input. Because again, I don't feel as if talking to one or two SHPOs, that's not the same as talking through us to all. And I think there's a lot of agencies here. There's also, I think, something at the Department of the Interior in terms of mapping for the country that's also in play here. I don't know enough about that, but
we're happy to convene meetings about this with members. Maybe we can do a special meeting.
I'd like to make a motion that we set up a task force for the resolution to be drafted in coming days.
I'm sorry.
I don't know if that's out of order, but along the same lines that Mr. Donaldson did the same thing 6 years ago, I think that's
well. Let me just say that the funding has already been received by the agency for a specific task, so we can have a task force that helps to, or we can have meetings that help to inform what the funding has been used for. But the permitting council has provided it for a specific task that we're obligated to do.
I think the ACHP is comprised of the members, the 24 members. So I would just like to suggest that we have a subset of those members be able to be more engaged with this issue.
We will certainly engage. Yes, go ahead, Reed.
I would just note that, to my knowledge, the Digital Information Task Force was never formally disbanded, so it may be that a task force still exists if that should be necessary. So I just note that to say that there may not be a need to create a new task force.
Okay. Listen, you guys, I just want to point out it's 10:48 and we have voting items after the break that we need to take, as well as the discussion on the NHO exemption. So if it's great to have this conversation. I'm happy to convene a separate meeting on this topic. At the committee meeting, the discussion was not as robust. So
Chair
this is a
Bronin,
bit of
I
a,
believe there was a motion on the floor. I'm not sure if there's any action that needs to be taken or to renew the existence of the.
I'll turn to Kelly, but I believe according to the operating procedures, the chair can convene subgroups of members and.
Or reconvene what may already be still in place.
In other words, I don't know that we need a motion forcing anything, or what would, sorry, Kelly, go ahead.
So the chair can convene a subcommittee at any time. The designating work to the subcommittee would require a vote, but for now, and if the existing committee still stands, I would recommend pursuing, let's double check to make sure if the digital task force still exists, utilizing that, and I think resolving that issue before we create or try to create a new subcommittee that might already have that
Is
work.
the motion in order, may I ask?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear
Is
you.
the motion in order as a member? Is my motion in order?
You can put a motion forward if there's, and then if
I
there's a second.
have so, ma'am. I have so.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, do we?
You could do a voice vote. Majority of present and voting.
Okay. For all those who are in favor of that motion, please say aye.
Aye.
I can't tell, so I think we're going to have to do a roll call vote. Actually, we should call for any additional discussion. I will point out that the extent to which any group of members can change what the permitting council has funded is limited in that they have funded us for a specific purpose. We are happy to take advice on that purpose, but there is a purpose for which the funding has been
Advisory
provided.
council, I believe, is comprised of the members. So that, I don't know, Ms. Cohen, if that would be out of order for there to be a task force to carry forth this particular task.
I don't know the answer to that. I put up my card tent to just ask if we could maybe postpone the vote till later in the meeting so we can get an answer to understand if the existing task force is still in good stead and could use that. That would help inform my request or my vote.
I'm glad to amend the motion to either set up a new task force or to renew the existing task force's work. Is that second?
Second?
To either set up a new task force, as Mr. Nelson points out, that we may already have one that's been dormant, to bring it back into play. That is my motion.
Okay. Is there a second to that motion? Okay, and let me just say once again that the extent to which this task force, if any, if voted on by the members, can actually change what we are doing in terms of the scope is limited by what the permitting council attributed the funding to. So additionally, the subgroup will not have voting responsibilities. Yes.
I just want to briefly, I know you want to move along, second all of our SHPO colleagues' concerns and express understanding for the intent behind this and support for the exclusion of tribal and archaeological sites. But again, without that, I think we're unsure of the value of this. And it's hard to see this kind of investment being made in light of that when that's wonderful, Ramona, that you have all of that data on SHPO's GIS capacity. Prior to 2023, although NAFPO has been in existence since 1998, it was one staff member. We do not have that kind of data on TIPO's GIS capacity. We could use some additional capacity, and we know that that is not the number of TIPOs that have their own GIS capacity. That would be, that's a baseline. That's a baseline that would go a long way towards serving the intent behind this. And we also will have our own geospatial directory getting underway soon with funding from the Inland Oil Spill Preparedness Program under the auspices of emergency response that would contain TIPO contact information in a current form and maximum area of interest information in a geospatial format. The intent being not to populate it with information on places, but information on whom to get in touch with to consult where. And we are concerned that a directory purporting to contain place information would create a false sense of understanding rather than encouraging people to consult, to get in touch with TIPOs and tribes and consult with them on their own place information, which, as I said, does need support in building their capacity to even inventory and document those places on their own.
Okay, other comments? Yes, Anne.
Oops. I'll be brief, which is usually hard for me. I was the chair of the task force back at the Preserve America Summit when we were seeking better digital mapping for the nation's historic properties for both federal use as also for SHPOs and TIPOs and local landmark commissions. And coming from a state with a lot of public land and a lot of federal agency management of those lands, I would encourage further engagement with SHPOs and TIPOs, as well as the National Association of Preservation Commissions, because these entities have various differing systems of the way they document and map their historic resources and are involved with the determinations of eligibility. So that would be significant in making this relevant in the application of 106 across the country. And I think without that, it'll become another thing that would have to be accessed rather than linked directly together as a management tool. So
yes,
I know you're working with Washington State, but
we just had because they have among the best sort of online resources, we wanted to get their feedback as to how they set it up. And actually we got some pretty good feedback. I think as Reed tried to communicate, this process will be just starting. And one of the things in phase one would be to work with state historic preservation officers and others to try to figure out what information is out there. I will say for our federal agency members, that we, and for others, that we did a survey of federal preservation officers and asked them, would an integrated resource about Section 106 eligible properties be useful? And 96% of federal preservation officers, the ones who are managing 106 projects, said it would be useful. What that means to me is that however information is being kept in different states, they would like to have this kind of resource as an additional resource, as Reed tried to point out, to the resources that are already available at the state level. So there, at least, for me, having looked at and kind of that survey, kind of worked with federal agencies, I don't think there's a limit on the number of resources that can be provided to them. I do think that as the agency that oversees this process, there is an obligation for us to try to improve our data capacity. It is a Biden administration-wide initiative, as the report to Congress just pointed out. And for us to say, oh, well, somebody else will take care of it is really, I think, part of it, it's like dismissing our own responsibility in this regard. So although there are resources out there, at least for me, I feel very strongly that we have an obligation to try to develop our own capacity, to try to get some with consultation, with engagement by members. We've been trying to do that in different ways, and we would continue to do that. But to help our federal agency partners who are actually conducting the 106 processes have an integrated place where they can help share information with each other. So that is the impetus behind this. It is part of, as I said, administration-wide initiatives to use data in better environmental permitting. It's no substitute, and Reed says this, we'll always say this, it's no substitute for looking at all the other resources that are out there, doing other records checks, and handling sensitively and confidentially information that is collected by tribes. But that said, I think we were planning to. We are happy to have member engagement to force a vote on a particular method of that. That's certainly in members' prerogative. But I think with Reed leading this effort, that may be unnecessary. But I'm happy to continue to have any more discussion.
For a point of order, I just want to clarify so you have a motion, you made a second. You said amending, but it sounded like you were actually clarifying your motion.
However you'd like to.
It would be easier if you were clarifying your motion.
Clarifying is fine.
Okay.
Mr. Nelson shared with us that this digital task force, they never have disappeared. It's dormant, perhaps.
Well, but we have a motion on the floor. We should vote to it now. We need to conclude that
Can we
matter.
repeat the motion?
Yes, can you repeat the motion as clarified?
My motion is to either set up a new task force to look into this question of digital mapping, or if the digital task force of 2018 is still in effect, yet dormant, to reactivate it.
And can we just have a second just to confirm?
Second.
Okay. And would you like to do a voice vote?
No,
or was it roll call?
We need to do a roll call vote. There was not a way to discern. So any other discussion? Carmen, did you have something?
I just wanted to repeat something that I said in the committee meeting, and that is that I think this is a good project, and thank you for taking this initiative. The location and preservation of historic African-American cemeteries is a real concern. And as I said in the meeting, I hope that we can incorporate that, somehow use a mapping to assist with that. So,
And I think that's something that we heard in that session as well.
Right. So, thank you.
Did you have your hand, Erica? Yes.
Yes. And aside from the motion itself, I want, as we look at forward thinking and look at who the partners will be, whether you're looking at the state historic preservation officers, for example, at the state level, I would also encourage you to reach out, for example, in my home state of Illinois, this kind of mapping, which has already been in the works for decades, is actually funded by counties, not the state. And it's managed through there's 101 counties in Illinois, and they're managed by the county property assessor's office that handles the assessments for property taxes. Conversely, in my adopted state of Texas, I know you're well versed with the Texas Historical Commission, which they keep an excellent atlas, and they've been doing it for actually decades now. But they also need to reach out to the Texas Railroad Commission, which is the arbiter of all lands in the state of Texas. And they have additional mapping and data beyond what the THC has. So I'm just saying, you now have more partners, but the interesting thing, these are already intact and they are already paid for. So it's just a matter of if hopefully it could be linked together in order to help streamline the whole process. So thank you.
Mr. Martinez.
Yes, thanks, Chair Bronin. At the committee meeting, Associate Director of the Park Service, Troy Beasley, mentioned that the Department of the Interior chairs the Federal Geospatial Data Committee. So again, just want to make the offer to help connect the Department of the Interior assets to the Advisory Council on this project, however the council decides to proceed. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Yes, Erica.
Just somewhat of a question as well as a clarifying comment. It's my understanding, based on the committee meeting and the information provided in the meeting book, is that this is an aggregating platform, right? This isn't about creating a lot of new data. This is actually about creating a network amongst all of the states, amongst all of the agencies, potentially moving into other organizations or county level partners as a way of aggregating specifically GIS, geographic information and spatial data, as opposed to creating new inventories, new digitization, all of that. And so there are lots of models for that, where you're not creating a new data system, you're just aggregating multiple data sets so that they are readable and usable, not only for the purposes of procedure in terms of Section 106, but it's critically important for policy evaluation. I mean, as a federal agency, we're not just doing permitting, my understanding is, and I'm new, but we also have a mandate and obligation to understand how policy functions for the benefit or burden of different publics, and our capacity to do that is critically dependent upon having data that talks to each other and on platforms that aggregate all of those different kinds of systems. So,
thank you. Okay, seeing no other comments, the motion is to, once again,
the motion is to set up a new task force or reactivate the 2018 task force for digital information.
okay. And just to pledge, if this motion fails, it may pass. If it passes, we'll set that up. If it fails, then we will still consult all the members. So I will commit to that. That's easy enough. Happy to do that. We can easily, as I said 20 minutes ago, set up a meeting to discuss this topic and specifically the implementation of this funding. So I think we need a roll call vote. Shayla, go ahead.
Okay. Vice Chairman Jordan Tannenbaum.
Aye.
Carmen Jordan Cox. Erica Avrami. Monica Rhodes. Sunny Ward.
Yes.
Jane Woodfin. Amelia Marchand.
Yes.
Governor John Carney. Representing the Architect of the Capitol, Joe Imamura.
Abstain.
Representing the Secretary of Agriculture, Merrill Harrell.
Abstain.
Representing the Secretary of the Interior, Mike Martinez.
Yes.
Representing the Secretary of Defense, Ron Tickle. Representing the Secretary of Homeland Security, Trey Watkins.
Yes.
Representing the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, Kristen Fontenot.
Yes.
Representing the Secretary of Veterans Affairs, Michael Brennan.
Abstain.
Representing the Administrator of GSA, Beth Savage.
Yes.
I'm sorry, Ms. Savage?
Yes.
Thank you. Representing the Chair of the Council on Environmental Quality, Anna Unruh Cohen.
Yes.
Representing the National Trust, Carol Quillen. Representing the National Conference of State Historic Preservation Officers, Ramona Bartos.
Yes.
Representing the National Association of Tribal Historic Preservation Officers, Valerie Grusing.
Yes.
Chair Sarah Bronin.
No.
One moment, please. Madam Chair, the motion passes.
Thank you. And on that point, I believe I am appointing the members of that group. Kelly?
Sorry, could you repeat that one more
I was
time?
saying I would appoint all the members of that group.
You're going to appoint
the members of the digital task force.
Okay.
So my initial idea is to appoint every member as a member of the digital task force. So we will be convening a regular session or a special meeting of that in the near future to talk about some of these issues. So congratulations to everybody and welcome to the task force. All right, with that, and you can show up if you would like. With that, I don't think we should take a break because I think we have we have votes and we only have 50 minutes left. So let's keep going, and for folks who want to take a break, go ahead.
Just one last thing.
Oh, sure.
Just a quick thank you. Take advantage of the opportunity to thank Jamie Leukinger. Jamie, stand up. the Director of the Office of Federal Agency Programs, as this is the end of this particular committee report. Thank you for your outstanding support, for you and your team's outstanding support. Thank you very much.
Excellent. So with that, I will turn to the Policy and Legislative Affairs Committee. We have a new chair of that committee. Want to thank Sonny Ward for his leadership as chair. Want to thank Erica for hosting that meeting, for hosting our first committee meeting. I'll pass the mic over to you.
Thank you very much, Chair Bronin. Last week, the Policy and Legislative Affairs Committee discussed several legislative issues and pending bills in Congress. Details of those are available in the meeting book under tab 1. There was consensus among the committee members to advance the motions outlined in the meeting book for consideration by the full membership. I'd like to, at this time, invite Drew Null to join us at the witness table to be available in the event that we have any questions or need further clarifications. Thank you, Drew. So the first motion addresses the fiscal year 2025 federal budget. The committee discussed the need for adequate funding for the Historic Preservation Fund, the need to extend its authorization, which has lapsed, and the importance of funding the new and as yet funded National Park Service African American Burial Grounds Preservation Program. The Policy and Legislative Affairs Committee recommends adoption of the following motion. Moved that the ACHP supports an increase in HPF appropriations in fiscal year 2025, preferably to at least $225 million, supports inclusion in the appropriations legislation of at least a 2-year reauthorization of the HPF, pending separate legislation to address long-term reauthorization, and urges Congress to fund the United States African American Burial Grounds Preservation Program and directs the chair to so advise Congress.
Second.
Any questions?
Yes. I just have a comment to provide. So I do support the motion to fund the HPF at a more robust figure, including parity in funding between TIPOs and SHPOs, and permanent authorization of the HPF so that TIPOs can be more adequately funded and so that historic preservation funding to tribes can be increased. I have additional recommendations that I may bring forward offline to you and to Chair Bronin.
Thank you. Any other comments? Yes.
I just want to say that GSA, as well as I think most federal agencies, funds fully supporting full funding of the HPF. However, because the president's budget is not at this level, I just wanted to make sure for the record that folks understood that however the vote goes, we support full funding for the HPF. Thank you.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. We need to take a roll call vote, don't we, for this? Yes. Right. Okay, so Shayla, would you like to proceed?
Okay, voting on our first legislative motion, Vice Chairman Jordan Tannenbaum.
Yes.
Carmen Jordan Cox. Erica Avrami. Monica Rhodes. Sonny Ward.
Yes.
Jane Woodfin. Amelia Marchand.
Yes.
Governor John Carney. Representing the Architect of the Capitol, Joey Mamora.
Yes.
Representing the Secretary of Agriculture, Merrill Harrell.
Yes.
Representing the Secretary of the Interior, Mike Martinez.
Abstain.
Representing the Secretary of Defense, Ron Tickle.
Abstain.
Representing the Secretary of Homeland Security, Trey Watkins.
Abstain.
Representing the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, Kristen Fontenot.
Abstain.
Representing the Secretary of VA, Michael Brennan.
Abstain.
Representing the Administrator of GSA, Beth Savage.
Abstain.
Representing the Chair of CEQ, Anna Unruh Cohen. Representing the National Trust, Carol Quillen. Representing Nick Shippo, Ramona Bartos.
Yes.
Representing NAFPO, Valerie Grusing.
Yes.
Chair Sarah Bronin.
Yes. And this is Merrill. Harold, I'd like to change mine to abstain as well.
Thank you. Madam Chair, the motion passes.
Okay, the next motion addresses tax incentives. Oh,
I'm holding the proxy for DOT, so that didn't get called.
Okay, did DOT deliver a proxy to you for GSA? Or is there a method to do that? Do you want to hand deliver it? Because I think we need that in order to, or can we?
We'll hand deliver it.
Or can somebody grab it, maybe? GSA for DOT.
DOT, as they weren't sure whether they would be in the room when the votes took place. I only received it right before the vote. And I asked if it had been submitted to you, and I was told it had. If it has not, then it's a different point of order. I just wanted to make sure that if it had, that I was representing them.
Okay.
So.
And you have it now.
You have it now. Okay.
And what would be the vote of the Department of Transportation?
Abstain.
Thank you.
Okay.
Lynn,
could you deliver it to the paper copy? We need that just to, Lynn is behind you. Thank you so much. Okay, now moving on to our second item. Let's go.
the next motion addresses tax incentives. The committee discussed anticipated major tax legislation next year and the potential opportunities it presents to promote tax credits for rehabilitation of older and historic buildings. The Policy and Legislative Affairs Committee recommends adoption of the following motion. Moved that the ACHP reiterates its support for the HTC GO Act and recommends its inclusion in any upcoming comprehensive tax bill. Urges incentivizing reuse of existing buildings, particularly in any housing or climate-related tax credits, and directs the chair to so advise the Congress.
Second.
Okay, any discussion? Okay, Shayla, go ahead with your roll. Yeah, you said yes?
I said second.
Oh, yes, so there's a motion and a second, and if there's any discussion. Okay, Shayla, go ahead.
Okay, voting on the second motion. Vice Chairman Jordan Tannenbaum.
Yes.
Carmen Jordan Cox. Erica Avrami. Monica Rhodes. Sunny Ward.
Yes.
Jane Woodfin. Amelia Marchand.
Yes.
Governor John Carney. Representing the Architect of the Capitol, Joey Mamora.
Yes.
Representing the Secretary of Agriculture, Merrill Harrell.
Abstain.
Representing the Secretary of the Interior, Mike Martinez.
Abstain.
Representing the Secretary of Defense, Ron Tickle. Representing the Secretary of Homeland Security, Trey Watkins.
Abstain.
Representing the Secretary of HUD, Kristen Fontenot.
Abstain.
Representing the Secretary of Transportation, Proxy GSA. Representing the Secretary of Veterans Affairs, Michael Brennan.
Yes.
Representing the Administrator of GSA, Beth Savage.
Abstain.
Representing the Chair of CEQ, Anna Unruh Cohen.
Abstain.
Representing the National Trust, Carol Quillen. Representing Nick Shippo, Ramona Bartos.
Yes.
Representing NAFPO, Valerie Grusing.
Yes. Yes.
Chair Sarah Bronin.
Yes.
Madam Chair, the motion passes.
Thank you so much. And turning to our last item.
Yes, the final motion addresses the National Defense Authorization Act. Both the House and the Senate versions address Section 106 review for historic housing and other facilities. The committee discussed the ACHP's usual opposition to legislative exemptions to Section 106. The fact that portions of the House bill are redundant, given the most recent Army program comment, the House bill's implications for the National Register identification and evaluation process, and the Senate proposal to expand the applicability of existing program comments to cover more Army housing. The Policy and Legislative Affairs Committee recommends adoption of the following motion, which is slightly revised from what was received in the original meeting book. We all received the addendum or amendment, and which was previously provided for your review. Moved that the ACHP draws the Congress's attention to the fact that Section 106 streamlining proposed in both the House and Senate versions of the fiscal year 2025 NDAA is no longer necessary, since recently issued and potential administrative options already are available to address the issues referenced. Urges the removal of sections 2834, 2835, and 2837 of the House version, since they would exempt projects from review under Section 106 and run counter to the regulations governing the National Register of Historic Places. Recommends that the Senate proposal to address 1941 to 1948 Army housing through application of an existing program comment reference the Army program comment for interwar era historic housing, associated buildings and structures and landscape features, 1919 to 1940, and directs the chair to so advise the Congress.
Second.
Second 3 times. Any discussion?
Do I have it? Now it's on. All right, let me try again. First, let me thank everyone for their support on the council, for the support of the Army's pre-1919 housing program comment that was passed earlier this year. It did fill a major hole in the ability for the Army to really focus maintenance on these facilities. It's important to remember for the folks that might not have been here previously, we have military service members living in these historic houses. So it's a little different than a lot of historic properties. So that's just one thing to keep in mind. Another thing I'll mention is we have not engaged the Department of Defense level yet with our staff members on the House Armed Services Committee or the Senate Armed Services Committee on these provisions. Have not developed the DoD-wide position yet. That will be coming in the near future, I'm sure, as they start asking questions. Nor have they actually asked us for our views yet on these provisions. So just wanted to put that out there. And once again, thanks everybody for their support of the comment periods. And I have to say that yes, the current process does work. And very supportive, and thank you all very much.
Thank you. Any other comments? Okay, Sheila, go ahead.
Okay, voting on our third legislative motion, Vice Chairman Jordan Tannenbaum.
Yes.
Carmen Jordan Cox. Erica Avrami. Monica Rhodes.
Yes.
Sunny Ward.
Yes.
Jane Woodfin.
Yes.
Amelia Marchand.
Yes.
Governor John Carney. Representing the architect of the Capitol, Joe Imamura.
Yes.
Representing the Secretary of Agriculture, Merrill Harrell. Representing the Secretary of the Interior, Mike Martinez.
Abstain.
Representing the Secretary of Defense, Ron Tickle.
Abstain.
Representing the Secretary of Homeland Security, Trey Watkins.
Abstain.
Representing the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, Kristen Fontenot.
Abstain.
Representing the Secretary of Transportation, Proxy GSA.
Abstain.
Representing the Secretary of Veterans Affairs, Michael Brennan.
Abstain.
Representing the Administrator of GSA, Beth Savage.
Abstain.
Representing the Chair of CEQ, Anna Unruh Cohen.
Abstain.
Representing the National Trust, Carol Quillen. Representing Nick Shippo, Ramona Bartos.
Abstain.
Representing NAFPO, Valerie Grusing.
Abstain.
Chair Sarah Bronin.
Yes.
Madam Chair, the motion passes.
Thank you very much. Erica, do you have anything further to report? Okay, excellent. Okay, so we're going to move on to our last item on the substantive agenda, and that is the Native Hawaiian Organization, I'll read the whole title, the proposed exemption for Indigenous knowledge-informed activities by Native Hawaiian organizations. As you know, well, actually, first, before I start talking about that, I just want to commend the Office of Tribal and Indigenous Peoples for taking on the staff effort for this particular exemption in light of being down a couple of staff members. So thanks to, well, of course, Ira, Matt, who is dearly departed. Thanks to Kelly as the office director, and especially Bill Dancingfeather for his really heroic efforts in this topic. For those out there online, an exemption is a type of program alternative that exempts certain activities from our review process. This exemption that we're talking about today is really different than other exemptions that we've done, 4 exemptions that have focused on federal agency activities, such as development of the interstate highway system and such as electric vehicle charging stations. Exemptions have been primarily proposed by federal agencies, and this one is different because it exempts certain activities, certain cultural preservation activities that are themselves historic preservation as we broadly define it, and specifically those activities that are informed by Indigenous knowledge and are unlikely to cause adverse effects. This policy statement, as members know, is driven in part by our Indigenous knowledge and historic preservation policy statement, which specifically said that we have to integrate Indigenous knowledge into our Section 106 processes. Indigenous knowledge, again, for those listening and unfamiliar, can be described, not defined by me anyway, as a body of observations, oral and written knowledge, innovations, practices, and beliefs developed by tribes, Native Hawaiians, and Indigenous peoples through interaction and experience with the environment. In addition to our policy statement, this document was perhaps inspired as well by a visit that former tribal member, Chairman Reno Franklin and I made to Hawaii, where we visited with a number of Native Hawaiian organizations, including at sites, sacred sites, sites where traditional agricultural practices were being conducted, and sites that had experienced, like fish ponds, some restoration led by Native Hawaiians and Native Hawaiian organizations. As we heard on the ground, Section 106 processes had sometimes presented challenges, particularly for grant recipients, some permitting activities across a range of areas. Many of the people that I met with, that we met with, asked why for preservation activities we needed the same kind of review. So as we thought about that, again, I credit Chairman Franklin for this as well. We thought about how do we respond to that. I want to thank our hosts, both FEMA when we were on Maui and Oahu, the Office of Native Hawaiian Affairs, the Department of the Interior, Office of Native Hawaiian Relations, and the Historic Hawaii Foundation. We have received, I guess, ACHP in particular submitted a comment related to this that I read or I posted at the committee meeting, but which really talks about the kinds of Section 106 processes for which they have, they said, long advocated for a different treatment for the kinds of activities that have involved historic preservation and stewardship. And I think that the characterization was something that we saw across the board. Some of you may also have seen an article in the Washington Post last week about the possibility of Lahaina rebuilding after the wildfire. And that article extensively relied on the statements of the Hawaiian, Native Hawaiian cultural monitor in Lahaina, who we met with on 2 days, and who had among his hopes for the site, should the community, in the broader sense, embrace it, the restoration of waterways, fish ponds, and traditional historic buildings, including some buildings that had been lost long before the wildfire. So again, there it will be up to the community to decide how to rebuild, but it was another example of the need for us to facilitate the kinds of Indigenous knowledge-informed activities that might be funded by, assisted by, permitted by, or otherwise having federal agency involvement. So in May, we put out a draft. I guess this is part of what I like to do, is just put something out and get comment on it, because without text, it's hard for people to engage. And so with that draft, which we highlighted in an op-ed in the Honolulu Star-Advertiser, the state's largest paper, which through social media, other means, our standard lists of communication directly with Native Hawaiian organizations. We tried to have, and I think we achieved pretty robust feedback. We got a number of comments. I personally responded to almost all of the comments. You got a link to those responses. Again, I'm just trying to do the best I could with taking those ideas, trying to distill them into words, and asking back, what do you think about this? The feedback that we did get back after those rounds was virtually all positive. And with staff, we've incorporated a majority of those comments into a new draft. So members received a clean draft prior to this meeting for our discussion. And among other responses to the comments, we strengthened provisions for historic and cultural properties not involved in an undertaking. We refined the scope of covered and excluded activities. We better defined the kinds of relationships that Native Hawaiian organizations have to show to the site that they are proposing to restore, rehabilitate, preserve, maintain. We added notice to the public, periodic reporting, and reviews. There were a few suggestions that are not included in the draft, but that if you looked at all the comments, as Ramona might have, you might have seen comments like actually expanding to include structures that were not Native Hawaiian and not made of traditional building materials, and that may never have been on the site, including offices, bathrooms, and housing. That was a suggestion that we did not take because of its potential for adverse effects. There was a couple of other suggestions that were made, and I think we enumerated those in communications. So today I just wanted to talk about a few things, which is any other comments or reflections that members have. Some of you, well, Amelia was at the NHO consultation meetings. Hopefully some of you were able to read the comments, and some of you were able to look at the draft as it stands now. Any additional amendments that you think are worth making, considering, and also very specifically, we only received one, I believe it was one written comment on the idea of a subcommittee that could be used to modify the list of covered activities, and could be used to expand the exemption to Indian tribes. And so that provision, I think, deserves more robust discussion, because it's the kind of provision that we normally amend such a document with the full membership. But it seemed like this might be, just an alternative way to amend this document in those two specific regards. Other amendments would have to go through the full membership. So I invite general comment, but I really do want to hear about the subcommittee, because I think that's something that a straw poll of sorts would be really helpful on. That's the kind of thing that if it's a controversial thing, we don't want to tank the whole exemption because of that, or we're happy to modify it. So I will open for discussion.
Chair Bronin, I'd like to take this opportunity.
Or can you, is your mic on?
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Okay,
we can.
Yeah. I'd like to take this opportunity just to make a few quick comments. During the committee meeting last week that we had, I mentioned AIRFA as the American Indian Religious Freedom Act as something to kind of keep in mind as we're moving forward with this. And one reason for that I wanted to reiterate and to share is that there's been, I feel, a clear and adequate lack of legal protections for Indian tribes and Native Hawaiian organizations to exercise their religious use of native plants, minerals, and animals. And so I do feel that this exemption would be one way to help resolve or remedy some of those issues that have been longstanding. Additionally, on, I don't know what page number it's on because this is printed, but there's a few edits that I would recommend to the draft. Some are pretty minor, and I haven't been able to share them with folks yet. But one that I think is important and worth sharing is stating that a lot of these, or the majority of these preservation activities, are expressions of intergenerational Indigenous knowledge transfer. And that those religious and cultural practices of Native Hawaiians are vital. I can't reiterate that enough. And so the more minor kind of edits, one is just like a little typo, and then one is whether or not under Section 3, covered activities, there's A, B, C, and C discusses the rehabilitation, preservation, restoration, or reconstruction of, and then it lists things. That first identification in the list is water features and systems, and it states including but not limited to fish ponds and other traditional aquaculture. I just wanted to confirm that Lo'i, the Kalo wetland production, is considered part of that aquaculture. And then the last little note that I wanted to make, or suggestion, I guess, is, and perhaps this is something that came up in the consultation with NHOs that maybe I missed, but I do think this would benefit from definitions of not just in the background for the exemption, but in the actual text, body of the text, definitions of Indigenous knowledge, definitions for Heiau, Ahu, Hale, Halau Wa'a, and if it's included, Lo'i. So those are some of the recommendations I wanted to make, and I really, I commend all of the work that went into development of this before I jumped on board this ship. So thank you to the staff. Thank you, Chair Bronin, for making the trip to Hawaii. And I don't need to reiterate anything else that you mentioned previously, but just thank you.
Thank you for that. If you don't mind emailing just the first thing, because I think I jotted it down, but and any other of the minor items that you mentioned. One thing about your last comment about definitions, which is, and I know this is something that we really grappled with in the Indigenous Knowledge Policy Statement, and I would invite any staff members to add to this. But if you look at that statement carefully, it talks about we are describing Indigenous knowledge. In other words, it's not for us as a federal agency to define Indigenous knowledge. So to put a stated definition in the definition section of our document would be, at least from what I understand, somewhat at odds with that. So I think maybe what we should do is to reference the description in the Indigenous Knowledge Policy Statement, which is a paragraph long, and there's more sort of nuance in that, and maybe mention that. As for the other topics, I mean, I'd welcome your feedback on this, the HALE and the other terms that are used. There too, is it something that are these things something that we can define, or are these things something that, do they have a widely accepted definition, or is using the word sufficient to then trigger the Native Hawaiian understanding of what that word means? And so this is, I think, part of what, for me, I'm learning about in this role, which is what does it mean to define, and what does it mean for the agency to define it? Is it limiting? Is it presumptive? Is it wrong? So I'd actually welcome your thoughts on that, because I'm still kind of trying to figure that one out.
Yeah, I do think that it would be important to specifically ask the NHOs that have been engaged in this process whether or not it would be culturally appropriate to include definitions, but I think I would defer to what NHOs would recommend. But knowing that probably the majority of people in this room do not know what Lo'i are, do not know what Heiau are. You don't have to completely know and understand something to want to protect it, but making sure that we're putting that question forward if that is the wish and desire of NHOs, I think that would be good.
So I'll just mention on that point, the feedback that we did get, and I could be missing a line or two, but the feedback that we generally got was to include the terms. But we didn't receive any request to include and define the terms from Native Hawaiian organizations that I can recall.
Correct.
Okay, so I don't know if that answers your question, but that said, we can look back at the comments and see if anybody did offer any definitions other than inclusion of the terms, and then add that reference to the description in the Indigenous Knowledge Policy Statement. Other comments? Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Again, we want to applaud the intent behind the creation of this and immediately putting into practice the IK policy. And also reiterate that NATHPO does not represent the interests of NHOs, nor do we claim to. We don't have them as members for statutory reasons. But we are keenly interested in getting this right for its own sake, as well as with an eye towards potentially expanding it to tribes in the future. I also want to voice my support for the addition of this provision suggested by DOD related to, intended to address potentially competing claims. And I want to note that I did see in some comments from NHOs a desire for an appeals process to be added to this. And I think that that could also be a really helpful way to backstop that potential issue as well. And so I strongly encourage consideration of that as suggested by some of the NHO comments. And I also want to ask if you have an idea of, we're not voting today, right?
Correct.
What is the timeline for that moving forward, and what additional discussion do you envision?
So just to take the first question first, the appeals process, there have been documents that program alternatives that have an appeals process. A couple of the recommendations mentioned an appeal to the ACHP. One reason that we, I think, at least didn't take it initially was, do we want to set this up in this exemption framework or not? Is it our choice? Is it would we be good at that? I've noticed some appeals processes that are in other documents. I don't know, Reed, if you have off the top of your head a model that you would think to refer to that we could pull language from to add that, and if what you were referring to was an appeals process to the ACHP. And I think what you mean is an appeals process from an NHO with potentially competing interests.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Bronin. So a couple observations about that. We typically have not developed or included appeals processes within it with exemptions simply because of the nature of what an exemption is. An exemption is really a at its root, a decision by a federal agency about whether the Section 106 process applies to a set of actions. And so we have not typically had to have those in exemptions. We do have appeals processes in other program alternatives, probably nationwide programmatic agreements more so than others. And I would be happy to have staff look at those and provide further information to the members about whether they feel applicable here. I would just note, though, as well, that I think there's an important role for the agency itself to first play in trying to remedy and address competing claims about whether it's cultural affiliation or culturally appropriate actions going forward. And so it's very, very rare for an appeal like that to make its way to the ACHP. We very strongly prefer to have the agency addressing any of those sort of competing claims, as they typically do in consultation going forward. So with those sort of admonitions in mind, I would be happy to have staff look at other models and at least present them for discussion. I would hope that it would be an extremely rarely used process because of the nature of this being an exemption.
Thanks. So for an appeal, were you envisioning to the agency or to the ACHP?
I don't want to go on the record with that.
I'm sorry, what?
I don't want to go on the record with that. I think further discussion would be good, as you say, Reed.
So do other folks have opinions on an appeals process, particularly maybe the federal agencies? Yes.
Any other federal agencies?
Oh, go ahead. No, go ahead.
Okay. So just one thing that I'm wondering, and we can discuss this more, but one of the models perhaps that staff could look into is free, prior, and informed consent processes to get all interested rights holders, tribal, native, indigenous rights holders included in discussion processes. And I don't have, I believe recently there was, ACHP developed a policy statement on UNDRIP, correct?
An action plan to implement.
Yeah, I don't have that before
some of
me.
the
It's not
principles.
memorized yet.
Yes, something like that. I don't have it off the top of my head either.
But perhaps that might be a good place where this specific discussion can come forward.
So I'm not sure if that's related to the appeals process question. I think that's I do want to just maybe, but I do want to focus on the appeals process.
I think it would be in terms of negotiating.
Go ahead.
Yeah, we agree. We think we need a little more detail on dispute resolution. We're not I'll say, comfortable yet with where that would land. I don't have the solution, but I think having more discussion about what were the possible solutions would be very helpful to us.
So currently in the text, there is, with the, where is it? With the additions to, I mean, the only places is currently included in the text are attestations that the NHO and the agency, the attestation by the NHO and a statement that this cannot be used where there is essentially known overlap with potential rights asserted by an NHO. So there's this language that, to the best of the knowledge of the NHO, no other NHO has asserted or would likely assert that the covered activities are or would be contrary to or limiting of the indigenous knowledge informed traditional cultural practice of another NHO. So there's that, and then there's an exception to the exemption in the covered activities that says that this can't be used where there is, a known conflict. And so I think what we're really talking about are those areas, and maybe they're rare, as Reed said, maybe they're not, but those areas where there is an unknown conflict that arises sometime later to be known through this process. So again, the idea is that these activities are taking place in areas where there is no known potential conflict, or at least to the best of the knowledge of the NHO and the agency. Anything where there is a known conflict, that's out of this exemption. Anything that where a conflict arises later is, I think, what we're covering now, or a conflict arises newly. So I do think it would be great now, if agency members or others have experienced dispute resolutions that would be appropriate for those types of activities where a conflict comes to be known later, an unexpected conflict, a new relationship with a site that's been established by a second NHO. Again, maybe those topics are rare, but if we want a dispute resolution procedure, I would like to talk about it now, because we have heard, that there is some interest in bringing this topic to a vote at some point. So if anybody does have specific ideas, I think it would be great. Sure.
Chair Bronin, I just want to say that we would like to help get this to a point where it is ready for prime time, if you will. But I think Ms. Marchand raised some questions. Ms. Grissing has some of the federal agencies. There's some, I hate to keep mixing up all the metaphors here, but I think there's some wrinkles that need to be ironed out. Our Hawaii SHPO has contributed some issues that they think would be helpful to the strengthening of this, and this is so important. We want to get it right, and I have carpenters in my family, so I'm going to share my favorite metaphor of all, which is measure twice, cut once. So I did not hear a date as to when the unassembled vote would take place. If it's premature, I don't know that we would be in a position to support it. We would like to support it, but we want it to be ready. So I hope you all will, I think our strength here is consensus and working together. So to that end, I'd like to see us get this straightened out as it needs to
I
be.
will say, you're right, I didn't respond to the schedule comment yet. After our committee meeting, we did send this draft that you have to every single person who had commented. And that was, I don't know, a week ago or so. And asking, really if you have anything else, and we have received zero comments back.
The Hawaii SHPO, I think, is working on
to
some
date, so
updated comments for the updated draft. So
great.
Forthcoming.
Great. And we've received none yet. And so whether that means, it's, again, I don't think any document will ever be satisfactory to all, but at least the report back is that we haven't received any pressing feedback. So I'd like to, oh, sure, go ahead.
Thanks, Chair Bronin. And Chair Bronin, want to echo your gratitude to the staff on this. And thank you, Chair Bronin, for elevating this issue to the Advisory Council and commencing engagement with Native Hawaiian organizations in the Native Hawaiian community. The Department of the Interior agrees with the goal of improving the Section 106 review process by federal agencies subject to the National Historic Preservation Act for more consistency and transparency for the Native Hawaiian community. In order to best achieve a prudent and informed outcome for the Native Hawaiian community and ensure that the Native Hawaiian organizations are fully included and provided with the opportunity to effectively participate in federal historic preservation programs, the Department urges the Council to undertake further consultation on the recently revised draft Native Hawaiian Organization Indigenous Knowledge Exemption. Among other reasons for additional consultation with NHOs and the Native Hawaiian community, I'll mention three right now. During the ACHP committee meeting last week, at least 3 members weighed in on the need for additional consultation. The Hawaii SHPO also recommended additional consultation. Although some Native Hawaiian organizations expressed support for the draft exemption, they did so conditionally while raising other concerns they identified as needing to be addressed. For example, the need for the appeals process and the need for a process to verify NHO eligibility were cited in several comments, including from Aina Momona and also from Kua. Both fall into this category. To help ensure meaningful consultation, these NHOs need the opportunity to understand how the recommendations were integrated, hear reasons for why recommendations were not adopted, and weigh in again on the final proposal in light of the recommendations and ACHP rationales that resulted in the revised draft. While the Historic Hawaiian Foundation advocates for streamlined Section 106 methods in some cases, HHF recommends a programmatic agreement approach rather than a blanket exemption. When deciding how it will vote on adoption of a final draft of the Native Hawaiian Indigenous Knowledge Program alternative or exemption, the Department of the Interior will rely in part on the draft's presentation of consultation-based problem statements and solutions, and the consultation record and the Council's reasoning for why and how NHO and Native Hawaiian community recommendations were adopted or not. The department recommends, the department commends Chair Bronin for her leadership in engaging with the Native Hawaiian community on this issue and welcomes the opportunity for NHOs and the broader Native Hawaiian community to consult on the revised draft of the program alternative that will, for the first time, reflect their feedback. Consultation on the current draft program alternative can help NHOs understand the burdens for NHOs under the proposed process, as well as the potential benefits conveyed to the self-attesting Native Hawaiian organizations. The feedback received thus far has been constructive and has prompted thoughtful reflections on processes that are working and others that could be further fine-tuned to engender more trust and reduce barriers in existing processes. We again thank Chair Bronin for elevating these concerns and look forward to working together to solicit additional feedback from Native Hawaiian organizations and the Native Hawaiian community. As the chair has detailed eloquently, this is an important issue and deserves full consideration to achieve the best possible result for the Native Hawaiian community, consistent with the National Historic Preservation Act's intent. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much. And since you mentioned KUA, I will say that they were one of the organizations, along with actually the Office of Native Hawaiian Affairs presented some really similar feedback. It sounds like you read both of those. And both of those entities responded to the language that I sent them, which is incorporated into this draft, saying that it addressed their concerns on things like the identification. We didn't hear back from Aina Momona yet, but we had a really good exchange with Tricia, who I believe is their vice chairman, at one of the consultation meetings, and talked about some of the ways to incorporate the feedback that she said she had submitted or was about to submit in writing. So we did have a pretty good live exchange with her. Again, not to say that that's the end all, receiving those two statements of support for this language, but just since you mentioned KUA. On the appeals process, do you have any specific recommendations for something like that, since you mentioned that?
I recommend taking this back to consultation to hear from the Native Hawaiian community and the Native Hawaiian organizations. And again, some of them presented an appeals process as part of a package on their favorable view of a potential exemption. So I think we need to hear from the Native Hawaiian community to see what pieces they recommended are still there and what they would like to see further.
Okay. Any others? Nobody has commented on the subcommittee. Does that mean that's fine? Go ahead. Anna.
I had mine up earlier on the subcommittee, but obviously we went into other conversations. I'll just reiterate the concerns that I expressed on behalf of CEQ at the committee meeting for the full business meeting here. I mean, I think as we are seeing here in real time, we are learning a lot from developing this exemption, and there are a lot of challenging issues that can arise in order for us to get it right and to support the Native Hawaiian organizations as this council wants to and is indicative in our Indigenous knowledge policy. And so the subcommittee amendment process has given us some pause, and I think especially thinking about dealing with the uniqueness of all of the federally recognized tribes that it could then be potentially extended to, which is that we should consider at least having all of the council be able to weigh in on the potential amendments for something that could be both as meaningful and also touch many of our agencies' work with those tribes going forward. So that is our concern. It remains a concern, and I'll need to talk to Chair Mallory more about it as we work towards a final text here. And I will also just say we did have a question about the operating procedures. We've had one answer, or we've had an answer back, and that's an area we just would like to understand the perspective, ACHP's interpretation a little bit better, but we'll do that offline.
Okay, I don't know if I got that question about the operating procedures, but.
You did, you responded to it, so.
Oh, I did?
Yeah.
Oh, great.
In that you thought our concern wasn't, that it was okay, so we'll talk with the lawyers.
Okay, all right, great. I didn't know if it was
understand it.
another thing. Sometimes I do things on autopilot. Okay, so I'll just make a note of that. So can we do a bit, so there's concern expressed about the subcommittee. Can we do a bit of a straw poll, if possible, if we can just, again, maybe, I know agencies are not officially voting, there's no statement of authority, you haven't taken it to your leadership, but as a human being, if you're an agency or a representative or for the other members, is there concern about a subcommittee that would be able to amend this to expand or change the list of covered activities, or to expand it to tribes? And if so, can we do that by a show of hands, if possible? If you have concern about that, could you maybe just signal that to me so that we can, I got 2, 3, 4. Okay, the concept is simply as stated. So it seems like there's enough concern about this that that's something, as I mentioned at the beginning, is easily removed. It does not need to be in there to, it's really a placeholder, almost a signal that this is something that could be expanded to tribes. Now that has been there, has gone out publicly, and has been signaled, perhaps we don't need that in the next draft. I'll just make a note of that. Thanks for that. So the issues that I'm hearing are of most relevance are the appeals process and dispute resolution. So I do think it's worth going, if there are not any other comments. Oh, sure.
So I would just like to offer a few additional pieces as well, and I know we're at time. And we, of course, within HUD support the idea of streamlining and focusing and prioritizing the critical importance of Indigenous knowledge in how we think about the Section 106 process. And so really applaud these conversations. And I think the conversation in the meeting last week and the conversation today speaks to how seriously we are all taking how we think about this and how we proceed. In addition to concerns, I know I just raised my hand, regarding the proposal for broadening this beyond Hawaii and NHOs by subcommittee, which I will say we were concerned about and would like to discuss further, and the issues you've already raised. I do want to state there are 2 others that I would love to talk about further, and we will submit comments following the meeting. The first is how we think about sites of significance to NHOs as well as under other criteria, and how we think about that in terms of the Section 106 process. And so I just want to raise that piece for our consideration. So if we have an architect, for example, or if it's about the development of a community that is broader than the NHO itself, how do we think about that when we think about this exemption? That would be one piece to add to further discussion. And the other is the attestation process that you mentioned. So before there's a dispute resolution, the language therein states that the NHO will determine that the covered action will not, quote, be contrary to or limiting of the indigenous knowledge and informed traditional practices of another NHO. And, you know, as a federal agency, I think we are all very much around this table taking very seriously our responsibilities to respect and adhere to and learn from indigenous knowledge, with the recognition of the significant number of Native Hawaiian organizations that we want to and encourage in our Section 106 process to consult with. And so how we think about that piece is certainly an area of concern in the draft as I saw it, and I would welcome further conversation on that as well. Thank you.
Thank you. On that, that's not a statement of a determination, it's a to the best of their knowledge statement. So it's a little bit different. And I think that was one of the reasons why the sentence at the end of 4 was added about the federal agencies remaining responsible for assessing adverse effects and so on. And I think that's a starting point, you know, to try to address that specific issue, but would very much welcome any, in your letter, if you have any specific sort of changes that are relevant to this draft or, you know, other provisions that you've seen elsewhere, that would be great. So I think, are there other comments? I know we've pushed this issue to the forefront of our conversations and have really, I think, generated a lot of interest and activity by Native Hawaiian organizations, by members of the public and others. And I think the next steps should probably be this draft, which has not been circulated beyond the parties that have already commented, can be posted to the website. You know, we're happy to have another meeting, you know, with 2 meetings, a public and an NHO meeting, just to discuss. I hope, Amelia, it will not be an empty meeting. We had a great meeting with the NHOs, 2 of them. I think you've been to both of those, I think. And so I hope it will not be an empty meeting. But I do think the issues that we should ask the public for specific comments on would be the appeals and dispute resolution. The draft that goes out, we'll make the couple of edits. If you have any edits, let me know ASAP, other than deleting the subcommittee exemption, a subcommittee line, a subcommittee reference. That will probably be that and make some of the other minor changes that we've already talked about today. I will schedule that with staff, consistent with our protocols, you know, in a few weeks, and we can move forward from there. Shortly after that, I'm happy to provide a quick report about the comments that we received, if any, and try to bring this issue to a vote. To help with that, if you have specific comments or ideas about the draft, this draft or the draft that will go out shortly for additional feedback, it would be helpful to have that. So whether it's specific comments or just general comments, it would be great, because I do want to bring this, this concept to a close at some point in the near future with all the appropriate consultation that we are happy to provide. So with that, you know, I don't know if there's anything else on that, but I'm happy to just close the meeting. I don't think there's any new business, but I do have a couple of things to let you know. I will be going to Chicago on Tuesday. I will be doing a talk at Northwestern Law School, and I will be focusing in that conversation on the Section 106 process generally, our policy statements, but also mentioning a bit about the State Street ongoing Section 106 consultation that I guess I communicate via op-eds this month in the Chicago Tribune and the agency action there. The Law Conference for the National Trust for Historic Preservation, and ACHP is co-sponsoring, is September 12th. And October 4th is our big conference with Georgetown Law School, Law Center, Cornell, and the AIA is a new sponsor of that. And we are going to have some really fabulous speakers who are working in their own countries on topics related to climate change and historic preservation. And I want to thank all the staff that's been involved in that, especially Adam Brodheim, who has been working on that. So with that, I think we can close the meeting and
Sorry,
just
Chairman,
oh,
Madam Chairman. I have one more, sorry.
oh, one more.
The timeline for the exemption, or do we not know yet? We're just going to take it as it comes?
We'll have to work with staff. I mean, it sounds like I'm getting at least some comments from HUD on specific topics. I don't know if anybody knows, maybe CEQ, you provide any additional comments. But if you could get it to me in the next week or so, then we can figure out a timeline. We'll announce the public engagement and consultation meetings.
Okay,
So,
thank you.
yes, we'll work on that and get back to you. And then just to say that the schedule of events for the September and November committee meetings is September committee, November actual meeting is in your book. And now am I done?
You're done.
Okay, thanks everybody.